Good evening, everyone. I am Amanda Benjamin.
I'm Paul Carganilla, and we welcome you to our mystifying show in which we explore mysteries of the unknown.
In this live stream and podcast, we'll tell tales of the paranormal and unsolved, while mixing in a little fun and live music as well.
And in this episode, we will explore the puzzling and cryptic topic of past lives or reincarnation.
Welcome to the Magical Mystery Hour.
If you're listening to the audio podcast of this episode, we invite you to find this show on our YouTube channel, the Vaudacity Network, where you can find any images or videos we share throughout these stories.
And to see our faces as well. And if you're already subscribed to the Vaudacity Network on YouTube, but it's a challenge to find the time to sit down and watch each episode, this live stream will be released as an audio podcast. So be sure to subscribe to the Magical Mystery Hour wherever you consume your podcasts.
Big thanks to the sponsor of tonight's episode, Emily Thatcher.
Emily brings us a quote from Viola Davis. All dreams are within reach. All you have to do is keep moving toward them.
I love that. Love that quote. Thank you, Emily.
Thank
for
you.
your constant support of the show. And thank you to those in the audience in the live stream giving me the feedback, the audio notes.
Or we already have notes?
Yes, balance wise, it always helps to know what the balance is, how the balance is looking.
Yes.
So
Am I low?
we can't hear it. Sorry, what were you saying?
No, I was wondering if my volume was low because I'm like in singing range and not as much podcaster range. So I was
In
wondering
my
if it was okay.
ears, I feel loud, but maybe let's bring you. But they said I was the low one.
Oh, okay. Well, then
you're
I'm
fine.
good.
You're fine.
Woohoo.
You're good.
I like when that happens.
You are fine.
I am fine.
And so summery in the yellow.
Yes, I was feeling it. It's still hot here in California. And so
Absolutely.
yeah.
And you just came from another podcast. What were you doing cheating on our podcast?
I know. I was a guest at another podcast. It's a comedy podcast, and so I was actually just telling people over there that we're gonna do a show on this, and so talk about Magical Mystery Hour and Amanda on Demanda.
Nice.
And then they talked about like current events, which I was like, ooh.
Yeah, having just started Carganilla Online Variety Entertainment Podcast, I listen to a lot of things and watch a lot of YouTube videos, and they say that like a really effective way to grow your podcast audience is to go on other podcasts.
Yes.
Because you're talking to people who already listen to podcasts.
Exactly.
So that's a lot easier than convincing someone who doesn't already listen to podcasts to introduce them to podcasts.
Yes.
And make that part of their life, and then subscribe to your new show.
Yes.
Which, am I still quiet, Mom?
Or maybe she was
how do I
behind
sound
when
to
she
you?
wrote that.
Maybe.
I can
everybody let me
raise
know
like
how to balance.
I can raise my computer sounds a little bit more, so like I can read you from here if we need to. Just let me
Well, it
know
all
if my
depends on-
background music gets loud after that.
It all depends on how people are hearing it.
I
Like
know.
how my vocal level compared to yours
Right.
is the important part, especially when we're mixing the podcast aspect of it later later on
no.
down the road.
Yeah, I still have to show you how to do it Zoom so you can do the separate tracks for each of us. Someday I'll remember to do that.
Yeah.
It's a one setting. It's a one button, which we'll get.
Well, hello to everybody in the chat.
Hello.
Again,
hello.
let us know how we're sounding, how our balance is at least.
And don't forget to like and subscribe. Like this podcast. Subscribe to the Vaudacity Network.
I'm going to take myself up a little bit. I'm going to turn my headphones down.
Oh, okay.
But I mean,
That's
it's
a
the
nice way to
balance
do
to
it.
me is I'm way heavier than you, but that's fine.
As long as it
We can
sounds
make
good
it
to
through.
everybody over there.
That is the important thing.
Yes.
However it's sounding through YouTube, through Zoom, that's the most important thing. I loved Emily's quote that she brought us from Viola
Yes.
Davis. All dreams are within reach. All you have to do is keep moving toward them. However, with tonight's topic, in a couple of my stories, I don't know if these dreams are something you want to reach.
Ooh.
because there kind of seems like there's a portal to memories that maybe you shouldn't have access to in Dreamland. But of course, it is a controversial, it is a huge mystery, and that is the topic of past lives and reincarnation.
Yes. So
do you remember
fascinating.
how this suggestion came about to be the theme of an episode?
Actually, it's because of what we're going to do today differently. We actually have a guest who is a past life regressionist as well as an astrophysicist. And I thought that is fascinating. Maybe we should talk about that.
Yes, our special guest interview tonight is incredible. Like her mind is wild.
Yeah.
Just speaking to her, we pre-recorded the interview, but as Amanda just mentioned, she's an astrophysicist, and she also she conducts past life
Regression
hypnotherapy.
therapy. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, let's get to it. Let's jump into the episode because we have a lot to cover.
We do. So the first thing, of course, that we always start with is a song.
That's right. And it's usually me jumping in the song water first.
I love that.
Preceding Amanda's storytelling. And we're going to keep that up.
Keep tradition.
Tonight.
We almost broke tradition.
Almost. There's 100 different ways we could have gone about this episode.
I know. And all day today, we were like, what? Right up until about 5 minutes ago.
And maybe in a different lifetime, we would have done it differently.
It's true.
As far as songs go, the one song that jumped to my head with this theme is the one that we did as a duet.
Yeah.
So that'll come at the end of the episode. But then just trying to think of another one, I had a tough time.
Right? And I actually thought of two.
I'm like, Alexa, Siri, give me some suggestions for songs about past lives and reincarnation. Mm-hmm. There aren't a whole bunch, but oh, my phone's listening to me. I shouldn't have done that.
Oh no,
it's fine.
She's like, did you just insult me, Paul?
No. She says, you want to listen to this podcast streaming live right now?
Right now?
Right now. But one of it, like I just, is memories. What memories do you have? What memories stick with you? And what do you remember? Because ultimately, that's for any claims of past life, anything. It's all about the memories. Mm-hmm. So I thought I would do a Sarah McLachlan classic that I believe she wrote as just, for people in her life. But if you listen to the lyrics through like a past life filter, it totally works.
Wow. I love when you can do that. Like you can change the whole meaning of a song, the whole interpretation, just by changing how you approach it. That's very interesting.
And we'll do that with I Will Remember You by Sarah McLachlan.
All right. Here we go.
I will remember you. Will you remember me? Don't let your life pass you by. Weep not for the memories. I'm so tired, but I can't sleep. Standing on the edge of something much too deep. It's funny how we feel so much, but cannot say a word. We're screaming inside, but we can't be heard. I will remember you. Will you remember me? Don't let Weep not for the memories. I'm so afraid to love you, but more afraid to lose. Clinging to a past that doesn't let me choose. Once there was a darkness, a deep and endless night, but you gave me everything, oh, you gave me light. I will remember you. Will you remember me? Don't let your life pass you by. Weep not for the memories. I will remember you. Will you remember me? Don't let your life pass you by. Weep not for the memories. Weep not for the memories.
I got some applause there.
Hey, thanks.
That was awesome. I put it in the chat, but for the podcast, I'll say there was in that last little passage you added this passing tone in there, and I was like, "Ooh, that was it." That was good.
Well, thank you.
I appreciate those little things. I was like, the whole thing was beautiful, but I was like, I don't know, you just did something like little thing, and I was like,
I will teach you that trick. It's the easiest trick, and it makes you sound a lot like you have a lot more skill than you do.
Yes, I need those tricks.
Nice little cheat. I'll teach you. Well, thank you. Isn't it wild how, like, if you look at that song through a past life lens,
yes,
like it totally is standing on the edge of darkness and clinging to the past that doesn't let me choose. Like, sure, it could be about something that happened in life, but if you're having memories from a life that wasn't yours, that's clinging to a past that doesn't let you choose anything.
Yeah.
Really. But it is a fascinating subject, the subject of reincarnation and past lives. And I can't wait to hear the stories, the mysteries that Amanda has concocted for us this evening on the topic.
Yes. Oh, so fascinating. I have 3 stories for you.
Whoop.
So let me get my background music. Let's make sure it's not too loud. It sounds good to me. I've talked to you before about my childhood obsession with the RMS Titanic. How I used to fantasize about what would life be in that era. What would it be like? At times, I could feel the ocean air brushing my face as I stared out at the azure waters of the Atlantic Ocean. I could hear the clinking of the custom china as I sat in the dining hall, savoring my dinner. And I swear that I could smell the salt water in the air. And what you might not know about me is that I also had a fascination with ancient Egypt. I absorbed everything I could on the subject. And once again, I imagined what it would have been like to live at that time. Could I be in an ancient temple? Was I maybe the great ruler Cleopatra? How would it have felt in the desert with the warm sand beneath my feet? My hands stained from creating hieroglyphics on parchment paper, the lantern light and incense that wafts through the air. Can you smell it? Let's take a minute and allow our imaginations to run wild. What if, just what if, These imaginings weren't mere figments of childhood, but glimpses into past lives. What if we are all connected, not by blood, but by a soul that has moved through many lifetimes? Does that sound absurd to you? Or are you a believer in past lives and reincarnation? Is it a concept that might challenge the skeptic in you? Today, I've got not one, not two, but 3 astonishing stories that might just open your mind to new possibilities. Are you ready to step into the realm of past lives and reincarnation? Buckle up, my friends. We're going to embark on an extraordinary adventure that'll leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about the mysteries of existence.
Before we go,
Yes.
could you smell the fresh paint on Titanic?
Ooh.
You mentioned you could smell the ocean air. I was like, is she going to say smell the fresh paint?
I did not.
Well, I'm excited.
So
I'm
close.
ready. My
So
seatbelt
close.
is buckled. I'm ready to
All
go.
right, let's do it. The first tale we will unravel together is the chilling case of the Pollock twins. It begins in May of 1957. John and Florence Pollock were parents to 2 girls, Joanna, who was 11, and Jacqueline, who was 6. But tragedy struck when the family of 4, embarking on their weekly trip to church, were in a horrific car accident that claimed the lives of both children. John and Florence were devastated. Their world was shattered as their family was suddenly ripped from them. But early in 1958, there was a glimmer of hope in their lives as Joanna found herself pregnant. By October of that year, they welcomed 2 healthy baby girls named Jennifer and Jillian. Here is where our tale starts to take a startling twist.
They were all named with J letters.
To be fair, Jillian is with a G.
Why would you do that?
I know. I actually thought the same thing. I was like, but...
You have 4 children. They all start with J, and you one starts with G?
Yes.
Okay.
I had
All
the
right.
same thought, so that makes that funny to me.
Okay. No.
So the twins started to ask for toys that belonged to Joanna and Jacqueline. But the thing is, they had been stored in the attic. They had never seen them, and the parents never discussed these old toys with the twins. They also seemed to recognize landmarks and places that they had never been before. And the parents knew that these locations were linked to the deceased sisters. But here's where the most compelling aspect of the story comes in. The twins began recounting specific and hair-raising details about the car accident that claimed the lives of Joanna and Jacqueline. The precision with which they described the scene, right down to the bone-chilling fact that the car had collided with a wall. They would get scared. Doesn't that
Did it
sound...
say how? Do you know how old they were when they started having those memories?
It was really young. I believe they were just a few years old, 3 or 4. And that's a common theme in these past lives.
Yeah, between 3 and 5 years.
Yeah,
Okay,
it's very common. Yeah. Doesn't that just send shivers down your spine? Like, gave me chills for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And needless to say that the car accident had not been mentioned to them by their parents. They're toddlers. You don't say your sisters are dead in a car accident. It's not what you do. So they had no idea how they knew this information. Are these mere coincidences, or is there an otherworldly force at play, connecting the living and the departed in ways we can't comprehend? Now, I know what some of you are thinking right away. Where is the proof? And I can already hear the skeptics from all the way across the internet. How about some physical evidence? Well, prepare yourself, because there is some. The Pollock twins' story is going to lead us a little further. Joanna and Jacqueline carried scars and birthmarks that actually mirrored those of their sisters, Jillian and Jennifer. According to first-hand accounts of the case, Jennifer Pollock had a birthmark on her forehead that was nearly identical to a scar that Joanna had obtained in a bike accident. And,
What?
yeah, startlingly, Gillian Pollock had a birthmark on her waist that was very similar to the scar that Jacqueline had from an appendectomy. Weird.
And these, I'm sorry if I'm jumping ahead,
No, it's
but
okay.
could these be like backed up and proven to be birthmarks in records, or is there any possibility these were scars?
Right. I mean, obviously it is possible. As I understand it, they worked with a doctor to kind of like document what was going on. And so
Okay.
there are pictures of them, and but I don't know if there are pictures of Jillian and Jennifer and their scars and birthmarks or not.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So these uncanny connections between these sisters, separated in this life, are practically begging us to explore the concept of past lives and the inexplicable notion of reincarnation. Are the links between these children coincidence, or is there a mystical cosmic force at play? Let's take a look at another tale that might just make you a believer. Ryan Hammond was born in 2005. His parents described him as having a strong-willed and assertive personality. He was a self-confident boy, and when he knew something, he held to his convictions with fervor. He was also known to have a robust vocabulary and a knowledge of subjects that were far beyond that of kids his own age. He was especially interested in Egyptian history and culture. Sound familiar? So Ryan's story began when he was a 4-year-old boy living in Oklahoma with his mother, Cindy Hammonds. Ryan began talking relentlessly about having another family and even another life in Hollywood, California. He described in astonishing detail living in a grand white house with a sparkling sapphire pool and friends amongst the stars. Ryan insisted that these were not fantasies. This wasn't something he made up in his child's mind. These were vivid memories etched deep within his soul. As the stories surged with astonishing clarity, especially considering this is a 4-year-old, Ryan's mother, Cindy, found herself entranced, but concerned by the intensity of her son's memories. I would be too. Ryan would provide the names of his Hollywood elite colleagues and his friends, including Mary Martin, who was, in fact, a real and somewhat obscure actress of the time. How could this 4-year-old child know who this was? How was he seemingly privy to secrets of this bygone era? And that's not all. Ryan hinted at living on a street with the word rock woven into its name somehow. A riddle that would lead his mother to find Hollywood's Roxbury Drive. Ryan's insistence about his former life led Cindy to explore the concept of reincarnation and do some research on the lives of Hollywood actors during the Golden Age. As Cindy was flipping through the pages of a book about the time, she stumbled across a page that featured a picture of Marty Martin. When Ryan glimpsed the photo, he exclaimed, "That's me! That's who I was!" Marty Martin. Who even knows who that is, right?
What 4-year-old knows who Marty Martin is?
I know. He just all of a sudden perked up and was like, that's me. That's me. What? So they started looking into who Marty Martin was. He was an American actor who was born August 6th, 1913 in Chicago. He was in several films during the 1930s and mostly landed supporting roles. He was not well known then. Like I said, he was kind of a supporting cast, and he's definitely not remembered today. And that begs the question, how on earth could a 4-year-old Ryan Hammonds know who he was? Well, his mom didn't
recognize a picture of
Yeah.
him.
Like, so that's me. His mom didn't even know who he was until he pointed him out, and they started doing this research. So Cindy sought guidance from Dr. Jim Tucker, a psychiatrist and professor at the University of Virginia, who specializes in researching cases of past life memories in children. And we actually talk about University of Virginia with our guest. If you don't know, the University of Virginia has a whole department about this, and they study past lives rigorously as a science. It is all fact-based. They look up dates and names and everything. It's not like, oh, okay, it's not something passive. It is very data-driven. So to get somebody from this department is a really good thing. So Dr. Tucker was intrigued by Ryan's case and conducted several interviews with Ryan and his family. Ryan told him several facts that he remembered from his past life. And then Tucker went and did research and found it all to be verifiable. He told him details about Martin's life that were, again, obscure, not well known, but turned out to be true, including his house, right? The pools, the parties, Mary Martin. Everything was confirmed.
We'll talk about it when we get to my stories. I'm sure. I mean, we might even talk about it before then. But the fascinating thing to me is the detailed memories for 3, 4, 5-year-old children, and where they could have picked these memories up from, or if they're not memories, where did this kid learn about Marty Martin and his childhood?
Yes.
And be able to recount them at 4 years old.
Exactly. I keep thinking that because, the obvious answer is, oh, his mom is feeding him this information. But how could a 4-year-old repeat perfectly everything to fool even a professor who tracks this stuff for a living? Like, I don't know. So
mystery.
Yeah, I also read, I wasn't originally going to mention, but I will add it in because I also read that Ryan went eventually and talked to Marty Martin's biological daughter. So they met in person, and he told her about Marty and memories, and she also confirmed that those really happened. They were real things, that he knew things that other people outside of the family wouldn't have known. However, Ryan suddenly felt really uncomfortable during the meeting and said that her energy had changed since he was alive. And he decided after that he would focus on living his own life. He would appreciate Marty Martin and everything that he has learned from him. He is a part of him, but now Ryan is going to focus on Ryan here and now.
Do you remember I'm sorry if you mentioned it, what age that was when they had that meeting?
I don't think that article said, now that you mention it. He was a little bit older. Like, he actually remembered it. I want to say he was between 7 and 10, but I'm not. Don't quote me on that because I'm not sure. Okay. But he was older, and he's one of the few people. A lot of times they say when kids go through this kind of past life thing, they forget as they get older. But he did not.
That's part of my stories as well. So that's why I was curious. Like, there's a theme in ages, like when they start and when they fade.
Yes.
So that's why I was curious.
Yeah, he remembered his, and he chose to kind of not bury Marty Martin, but he would not be his first personality. He was going to be Ryan and just carry the experiences on. So.
Good for him.
Yeah. So, researching this story has made me ask some questions. Are memories locked within the tapestry of our soul, waiting to be unraveled by the curious and the brave? Is there more to life than meets the eye? Secrets whispered by the echoes of time itself? Or is this merely a hoax? Was it orchestrated by a precocious little boy from Oklahoma and his doting mother? I'm interested to know what you guys think, so let me know in chat comments. Now, I'm going to take you on a journey again. This time, we are going to talk about the puzzling tale of Dorothy Eady. Let's set the scene. It's London, England, and it's a cold January day in 1904 when a baby girl, Dorothy Eady, was born. The first few years of her life flowed like any other child, innocent and unremarkable. But destiny had something phenomenal in store for young Dorothy. In 1907, at the age of 3, a tragic fall sent her tumbling down a flight of stairs. Her innocent laughter turned to silence as she lay motionless on the floor. The family doctor was called, and he found the child to be unresponsive and declared her dead. Her parents were devastated, and the doctor left to retrieve the death certificate. When he returned an hour later to fill out the forms with them and to console the distraught mother and father, as they sat downstairs, they heard noises coming from Dorothy's room. When the trio went up to her room to investigate, they were startled to see Dorothy sitting up in the bed that they had placed her in and playing as if the accident had never even happened. Yeah, she was declared dead, and then an hour later she was playing.
I don't like this, but I want to hear it.
After that fateful day, Dorothy seemed like an entirely different child. She had vivid dreams about living in a huge columned building, and she would often talk about going home. She wanted to go home, but her parents told her she was home, and she would insist that she wasn't and become depressed or angry. She missed her home, and she just needed to get back there. At the age of 4, the family went to the British Museum, and when they arrived in the Egyptian gallery, she exclaimed, "Home!" And she began running through the halls, kissing the feet of statues of gods and pharaohs. She even yelled at people for wearing shoes in the presence of the gods. Finding the Egyptian gallery was the only place that Dorothy was truly happy, the family spent much of their time in those halls. When she was 7, Dorothy's father bought her an Egyptian encyclopedia, and he would often find her looking at the hieroglyphics through a magnifying glass. When asked what she was doing, she would simply respond, "I'm trying to remember." Fascinating. Then, one day, as she was reading a science magazine, Dorothy came across a picture of the temple of the pharaoh Seti I in Abydos. She asked her mother, "Where's all the greenery? Where have the trees gone? Where are the gardens?" When her mother asked her where this was, Dorothy smiled, and she pointed to the picture and said, "Mama, this is my home."
What?
Yeah. So as she grew older and more articulate, Dorothy began speaking of a past life. Not as Dorothy, but somebody from an ancient world. Ancient Egypt, to be precise. So again, you can see why I chose the story. Can you imagine the wonder and bewilderment of those around her? Some people reacted really badly to this openness regarding her belief in a past life. She was even kicked out of Sunday school because she refused to sing a hymn that spoke badly of Egypt. And she had an argument with the Sunday school teacher about Christianity being based off the religion of Egypt in some respects. Still, she refused to back down from these beliefs, even if it could have made her life easier. In the 1930s, an extraordinary encounter unfolded in the hallowed halls of the British Museum in London. Amidst the artifacts and relics, Dorothy stood, her eyes alight, absorbing the sight in front of her. She found herself in an exhibit of ancient Egypt, and she just felt an inexplicable familiarity and comfort with the items in front of her. She claimed not to recognize just one or two, but several of the artifacts there. And she accurately identified the purpose and origin of the tools in front of her. So she would say, this is, this was made in and this was for, and this was made here and this is for. And she did it for each of them. And then they asked about it and she had been correct. She knew where they were from and what they were for, which is impressive. So this experience seemed to ignite something within Dorothy. After this, she claimed to have detailed memories of her past life in ancient Egypt. She would have vivid dreams, hearing the voice of somebody named Hora, who would tell her to write everything that they were saying. She would find herself in a trance, and she dutifully wrote everything that she could. Upon leaving the trance, she would then review what she had written and saw that she didn't even recognize her own handwriting. After a year, she had 70 pages written. Piecing it together, she realized that it was her story. Her real name was, I love that look you just gave. Did you have something to say?
This is a wild ride. No,
I know.
I don't want to interrupt you. Like, I feel like every time I start talking, I totally derail the wonderful storytelling. So I'm just listening.
So her real name was Bentrishit, and she had been a priestess in the temple of Seti I in Abydos, Egypt, over 3,000 years ago. Her father was a soldier and her mother was a vegetable seller. When her mother died, her father sent the young girl to a temple to be raised. When she came of age, she had to decide whether she wanted to stay in the temple as a full priestess or if she wanted to leave and rejoin society. She decided to take her vows, but a few years later, she met the pharaoh Seti I, and they began a torrid affair. However, the virginal priestesses were off limits to any man, even the pharaoh. When she became pregnant with the pharaoh's child, she knew that she would be disgraced, put on trial, and likely sentenced to death. In order to protect the pharaoh, she decided that she would end her life. Dorothy now felt that she truly understood herself in both lives. She claimed to have knowledge of that temple's layout, rituals, and practices. Experts said the details that she shared were startlingly accurate. She somehow knew the layout, everything, just anything they could ask her about it, she knew. How?
It was her house.
It was. At the age of 29, Dorothy moved to Egypt with her then husband, who was a wealthy Egyptian student. When she arrived on the shores of Cairo, Dorothy fell to her knees, kissed the sand, and said, "I am finally home." Dorothy Edie's marriage was conflicted, to say the least. Her husband's family was quite rich and didn't like the fact that she was so outspoken about her past life, and they found her to be intolerable at times. However, she had a son whom she named Seti, and then changed her own name to Seti, or Mother of Seti. Within a few years, they were sadly divorced.
Because he wasn't a pharaoh?
Apparently not. I mean, it is a little weird, too, to, name your kid after someone you loved in past life and has been in this life. It's got to be kind of difficult for a man.
Yeah.
In, what is this, 1940s, 50s?
I mean, I won't say I wrote a screenplay about something similar to that, but... but maybe.
But maybe. So after the divorce, Dorothy found a job with the Egyptian Department of Antiquities. She was actually the first woman to be hired by the department and quickly proved her worth. She became a respected scholar, even though she had no formal training in the field. They found her to be on the level of everybody who had gone to school and studied this for decades. In 1952, She found herself in Abydos, her home from centuries earlier. She found the great temple of Seti I and recognized it as the place that permeated those vivid dreams as a child. I imagine that she wept at the sight as she was overwhelmed with emotion. She was home, and she would never leave again. Being in this majestic place, Dorothy felt a sense of comfort, and she began to live her life in the truest way that she could. She worshipped the old gods in the traditional ways, and she was not shy about talking about her experiences in ancient Egypt. Many scholars were put off by this, but they would take notice when she started making some new discoveries. They could never deny her knowledge and the things that she did. For example, Dorothy was at a dig site, and she said to her colleagues, "Dig here. I remember an ancient garden was right here." And what did they find? An ancient garden. How is that possible? This happened a lot.
Because she remembered it. That's how it's possible.
That's how it's possible. She found tunnels. She found false walls. She even found an entire library just using her memories for directions. So I'm going to jump forward a little bit to tell you about a discovery that I found particularly interesting. In 1972, she claimed that the lost tomb of Nefertiti was hidden under the tomb of her stepson, Tutankhamun, King Tut, as you may know. But despite the discovery of King Tut's tomb in 1922, the tomb of Nefertiti had not been found. But in 2015, radar imaging was used in the area, and a chamber was found. So her prediction came true.
That's because she knows it's there.
She just knew.
Yeah, she remembers.
Wow. In 1957, a new chief of antiquities was hired, and he found himself unconvinced of Dorothy's stories. He decided that he wanted to test her so-called memories of ancient Egypt. He believed that she had an uncanny understanding of the culture, and that led her to her discoveries, not that she had actually lived a life there thousands of years ago. I mean, he was a scholar after all, so that does make sense. One night, he took Dorothy to a temple in the middle of the dark, dark night with only a torch for light. This particular temple had only recently been discovered, and there were no documents published about its layout, and Dorothy had never been to the temple. The director asked her to lead him to various parts of the temple in order to stump her, but she was correct every time. After 6 attempts, he resigned to defeat. Let's take a moment to just admire the astonishing tale of Dorothy, or Seti, the modern girl with memories that trace back through the sands of time to the ancient world of Egypt's pharaohs and pyramids. What a life.
What a life's?
Yes. What lives?
Yes.
So as these 3 stories come to a close today, I reflect on this mesmerizing journey through the tales of the Pollock twins, Ryan Hammonds, and Dorothy Eady. Indeed, we find ourselves at a crossroads of wonder and bewilderment. These stories, if they're true, hint at a profound interconnectedness that transcends the boundaries of time and space. What if we are really connected by some invisible thread that weaves the tapestry of our existence, binding us together across lifetimes? Are these coincidences? Or is there a deeper truth that only a few people can comprehend? For now, and maybe for lifetimes ahead of us, this will remain a magical mystery.
Give it up for the storytelling of Amanda Benjamin.
Thank you. Your applause sounds are not working here.
Mine are not working?
Yeah. I'll play mine.
Oh, I turned original sound off
Oh,
because
no.
my air conditioner on. Let me try it now.
There it is.
Miss Amanda Benjamin, ladies and gentlemen. Fantastic work putting those stories together. As always, you're such a great writer. You should write a book. I'm not even joking.
I was talking about that when I was doing the other podcast. I said how I would love to put a bunch of these stories together, you know, write a little forward and make it a book.
So good.
Yeah.
So good. And so fascinating.
Right? I just was like, these stories are incredible. I said, and I understand. I know. I always say I know that there are a lot of skeptics, and I always think too. I'm skeptical in that I do like to see proof of things or experience them for myself before I can say yes, they're really true. But this one has all of these stories have so many facts behind them. You know, it's just it makes you think. It really does. I love these stories.
It's something that we've talked about before. Like, okay, in any mystery, and when somebody's claiming that something happened, you kind of have to go, okay, but if it's not true, why are they making it up?
Yes.
Like, what is the motivation for them completely being just ostracized
exactly.
or looked at as the village idiot for no reason?
Exactly. Like, what do these little kids have to gain? You know, what did Brian Hammond wasn't famous? He did a couple interviews, but it's not like, you know, he didn't make $1 million off his story. And he decided he didn't want to. You know, once he met his, you know, daughter, he said, no, I don't want to pursue that.
Yeah.
Why would you do that if it was fake? You know?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, as we have a lot to cover this evening, we'll just roll
We're
along.
Gonna keep going. I know.
Jump in mind.
We're trying
and there's so much we can discuss, and there's so much we do discuss in this interview. I want everyone to still be awake for the interview that
I know. But if you do fall asleep, make sure you come back and watch what you missed, because it's all very interesting.
Yes. I want to just preface I've got like a couple stories, but the first one's like three. I'll explain as I tell the stories. But I want to preface it with a story that I was told by my friend, a family friend, Zach Woods, who I've talked about so many times on the Audacity Network. He's an amazing actor, director, writer in the film and TV world. He and Everly are going to be working on a project when the strike finishes, and he made a short film with her,
which was so good.
Oh, and we've been in close touch with him for over a year now. He's been a big part of our lives, and he's going to be a guest on Cove podcast once the strike is over.
Yes.
Can't wait for that.
I would love to meet him one day. I'm just saying.
Yes.
Like, I loved him in The Office. I love his work. So
Office, Silicon Valley.
Yes.
It's also good.
All of his stuff.
So and he's the star of After Party 2, which is happening right now. I can talk about it because I'm not in it, but he's the murder victim in After Party 2, which is streaming right now on Apple TV Plus. But so I had sent him my short film Sparked, which I can talk about because it's a non-union project. Yeah. And he recalled this tale that he had heard, and he emailed me about it. And I just want to read this to kind of preface, and it ties into the entire theme that we're talking about tonight. He says, I heard the photographer Nan Goldine tell this story in an interview. Her friend had just had a baby. It was her second child. She already had a son who was 4. During a moment in which her son didn't know she was listening, she heard him lean over the baby's crib and quietly say, do you remember God? Because I'm beginning to forget. So it's a 4-year-old talking to her newborn, asking if the newborn remembers God, because the 4-year-old's starting to forget.
Yeah. Wow. That's big.
A little bit.
Yeah. That just gave me like all the... Like, not even chills. I can't describe what that feeling was just now.
And it's the whole theory that like if our spirits come from God or the source or whatever
Yeah,
label
whatever
we're
you
putting
think.
on it, and then we come back and do it again, like as we're the younger we are, the more we remember, and then that is the battle, is remembering why we're here in the
Right.
journey. And so it kind of just ties into this, like in listening to a bunch of stories and figuring out what stories I wanted to tell today. There is a common theme of these memories starting between the ages of 3 and 5 and then going away between 7 and 9.
Mm-hmm.
And for different reasons, I think a lot of times, as we'll talk about in my stories, like it's a purposeful, okay, we need to move on and live this life now.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, my mom made a point in the live chat that like this is interesting, the story of Seti, because she embraced it her whole entire life. She didn't try and go, well,
Yeah.
okay, it's time to move on. She just
No,
fully embraced it.
she wanted to be Om Seti, more than,
Yeah.
or well, I mean, Bencher, but she wanted to be that person, her past life, more than the person that she was living. It's very interesting.
Pretty wild.
Yeah.
Well, I have two main stories tonight.
Oh, and do you want me to do my song first, or do you want me to do it after?
You can do it after.
Okay.
Because then we have the interview.
Yeah. Usually I do it before your story, so that's why I wanted to check in. But I'll do it after.
Okay. No, let's do it now.
No.
Perfect.
Either way.
It's a good little break between the storytelling and the interview.
Yeah.
And I think we're going to love it. And I love this song. I already know what you're doing because we sound checked. And tell the audience what song you're doing tonight and how it fits into the theme.
Yeah. I always tell people, and you guys know by now, that one of my favorite artists is Nick Drake. And he has this song, and I always had kind of an interpretation of it, but as we were talking about past lives, I was like, whoa, this could totally be about past lives and not, things that could have been, but maybe the things that he literally could have been lifetimes ago rather than this lifetime. This song is called One of These Things First. And disclosure, I will use the track tonight because Nick Drake's picking patterns, like I always tell people, are just incredible, and I'm not there yet. And so I'll need to spend some time figuring out my own interpretation of this song. So by the time the podcast comes out, hopefully I'll be ready for a neat interpretation of this. But for tonight, I wanted to keep it kind of as he wrote it.
I'm sure you will perform it brilliantly on your own when the time comes. Yes. But tonight we cannot wait to hear Amanda Benjamin performing Nick Drake's One of These Things First.
All right. Could have been a sailor, could have been a cook, a real life lover, could have been a book. I could have been a signpost, could have been a clock, as simple as a kettle, steady as a rock. I could be here and now. I would be, I should be, but how? I could have been one of these things first. I could have been one of these things first. Could have been your pillar, could have been your door. I could have stayed beside you, could have stayed for more. I could have been your statue, could have been your friend. A whole long lifetime could have been the end. I could be yours so true. I would be, I should be through and through. I could have been one of these things first. I could have been one of these things first. Could have been a whistle, could have been a flute, a real live giver, could have been a boot. I could have been a signpost, could have been a clock, as simple as a kettle, steady as a rock. I could be even here. I should be so near. I could have been one of these things first. I could have been one of these things first.
Love it. Love Nick Drake, and you always do an amazing job with his music.
I love it so much. And isn't that just perfect for past lives? Yeah. Like all these things you could have been. And I like when he says, like, I could be and I should be here and now. He said that, and I could be and I should be, but how? Right? That totally reminded me of Dorothy Eady. She's like, I should be living now, but how could I when there's this inside me?
Yeah.
I love
and who cares if it's an inanimate object?
Yeah.
As we'll talk about with our guests.
We will.
Maybe those are creating energies and memories.
Maybe.
Great job. Give it up one more time for Amanda Benjamin. Nick Drake's one of these things first.
Thank you.
All right. Well, as Amanda went into her introduction, I thought maybe she was going to bring up some Titanic past lives because, of course, you know, I'm on it.
Oh, I knew that you were going to be on it. I didn't even touch it. That's why I at least mentioned it in my intro.
We are going to begin with a young boy named Jamie. And if you Google past lives Titanic, I don't have any photos or images or videos to share with you tonight, but if you want to find them, you can after you listen to the episode. They're abundant on the interwebs. Jamie grew up in Madison, Wisconsin, born to his parents, John and Susan. He has an older sister. Her name is Teal, and she was 18 years older than him. his mother had her, obviously, when she was very young. And then 18 years later, James arrived. James was a great kid. One thing that they thought was interesting at the very start was he was afraid of water from a young age, which grabbed the attention of his older sister, Teal, who was in college now and studying forensic psychology. And she found that a lot of young children's, or she learned that a lot of young children's attitudes toward water usually were based on their parents or what they observed. And she thought it was odd because her whole family was loved the water and loved being in the water, and they had a pool. But anytime James had to go past the first or second step in the pool, he would panic. And so that was kind of odd to the family. Another odd thing that stuck out in his sister Teal's mind was when he was about 3 or 4 years old, she was out with him in the front of their house on the sidewalk. He had just gotten a new tricycle, and he was riding it around, and he mentioned to Teal that he used to watch Mommy ride her blue bike up and down the street. And Teal's like, "You're 3 years old. How did you watch Mommy ride her bike down the street?" And he said, I was watching her. I was looking down through the window. And so she goes to Mom and tells Mom what he said. And Mom, Susan, said, "Yeah, I had a blue tricycle when I was about 5 years old. They were in the same house." She said, "I used to ride up and down the street. How were you watching me, Jamie?" And Jamie told her, "They have windows in heaven, Mama."
Oh.
They questioned him a little further, and he proceeded to tell them that he chose this family. He chose to live here. And they were like, "Okay, that's interesting." They noticed a couple other subtle changes. He used to just randomly speak in an English accent.
Oh.
When he was still learning to speak. He was about four years old, and our English accent would pop up. And they noticed that he wouldn't use the terms left or right when he was describing directions. He would only use port or starboard.
No.
Yeah.
I can't even keep those straight.
Right?
I don't know. Don't ask me which one is which, because I don't know.
The only way I remember is port and left have 4 letters.
Oh. Okay.
So port is left, and then it's obviously starboard's the other way.
Okay.
But then there's forwards and backwards, and
yeah.
then it all gets... Anyway. Around the time where Jamie was late 4 years old, about to turn 5, was when the night terrors started. He would wake up, or his parents would wake up, 3 o'clock in the morning. He would be screaming, fits in his room, and then he would just burst out the door and run up and down the hallways looking for somewhere to go. And eventually he would settle in, find some place he felt safe, and sleep there for the rest of the night. Some nights it was their bedroom, some nights it was the couch, some nights it was sister's room. But it was this pattern. It was happening 3 or 4 times a week. He would just have night terrors, scream, run out of his room, and find somewhere safe to be. His sister, again studying forensic psychology, said this is totally normal. Kids have night terrors,
right.
And it's common. It's totally common. So the parents were like, "Ooh, okay, cool, fine.
Okay, this is normal."
So we'll just kind of deal with this for a while, I guess.
Yeah.
So they don't go away. They keep going. They're going for about a year. When parents decide to go out on a date, leave Jamie with a babysitter, come home to discover that babysitter had been watching Titanic while babysitting Jamie, and that lit a fuse in him, or connected dots, made a connection in his brain, in his mind, in his memories, and Jamie was suddenly obsessed with Titanic. I can't relate.
Not at all. Nope.
So obviously his parents were upset with the babysitter. Thank you very much. Goodbye now.
You're never
but
coming back here.
Now Jamie is drawing, painting, sketching Titanic incessantly. They say like for the next 2 weeks after watching the movie, he produced about 50 like of these works of art in detail. Not only were they like in color and the right color, but there were instances where he would like draw cross sections of the ship and draw all the different levels, like boiler rooms down here, this, and his mom says like it's things you Titanic's a love story. These are things that you wouldn't know about the ship just by watching the movie. He intricately knew details of where the layout of the ship, basically. And that's when Mom Susan started to realize she'd always believed in past lives, and she started to think maybe this is connected to the night terrors, and maybe Jamie was on Titanic. And so they start to expose him to more details about the ship to see if it helps with the night terrors, if it makes them worse, just to kind of experiment with it. And as they do, Jamie begins to have this growing guilt toward and empathy toward the fellas that worked in the boiling room, the stokers and the firemen that worked down there. And he became obsessed with the fact that they were the first to die, and some of them were trapped and weren't able to get out. And then he started to blame himself. They found that he started to say, it's all my fault. The design, it was a poor design. I could have done this, I could have done that to make sure that they were safe. And then he started coming to them over time, over the next couple of weeks, with different things that he could have done better in the designing of the ship, and telling his parents of the shortcomings that happened when they were building the ship that were against his original designs. And these things kind of added to the fact, or aided in the sinking of the ship, like that when they were substituting the steel with iron and things like that. He was telling his parents about this. He's 4 years old.
Yeah, that's what I keep thinking. I'm like, you're 4. How could you be talking about a boat design?
And these aren't things that aren't necessarily described in the movie. It's like, so if he watched Titanic with his babysitter and it totally stuck with him, but like things like that, like the iron instead of steel, when the iron becomes brittle in the cold, like he was like explaining these things to his mom, and his mom was just like, I don't know how you know that. Yeah. Because that's not in the movie.
Right.
So they start to explore, like, who could he have been? And these, they're people who were not Titanic experts, so they start to do their research, and they find Thomas Andrews in books, and find that he was the main architect of Titanic. And so they start to think, well, maybe Jamie was Thomas Andrews. And his sister is just thinking, like, this is a bunch of baloney. Like, right. I'm totally, up for just exploring the psychology of this whole thing, but past lives doesn't pop up on my radar as a reason here. So, as I mentioned, his parents were trying to like give him more information just to kind of see if it helped or did away with the night terrors. And so they found this CD-ROM video game that had the blueprints of Titanic laid out, and it was a game where you would follow clues. You'd find a clue, it would lead you to a different room, and you'd have to kind of find the way, but without having a map. But it was like a 3D version of, you're on the ship, where do you go, left or right, this way, that way, up the stairs, down the stairs.
I kind of like this game.
Yeah,
I want this game.
If you haven't seen it yet, look up Titanic Honor and Glory on YouTube. They're making a full virtual reality layout of the Titanic, and it's beautiful.
Yes.
You'll have to check it out if you haven't. But they plug it in, they plug the video game in, and the first question is, or the first hint is, you have to get to Thomas Andrews' room. And Jamie just goes, okay. And he goes directly from where the game starts to Thomas Andrews' room without even
No other
stopping,
hints,
without
no.
pausing, without looking at anything, without making any errors. He just goes directly to Thomas Andrews' room.
What?
And that's when his sister Teal was like, okay.
Okay, something's going on here.
All right. That's not normal in a 4-year-old.
It's not.
To know how to navigate walking around the Titanic. So the night terrors are still going on. They're not getting any better. They're not getting any worse. And he's just constantly drawing and painting Titanic all the time. And finally, there's a Titanic exhibit that's touring and coming close to them. There's one in Chicago. So they decided to take him to that and see what his reaction is there.
Okay.
And they take him there. They thought maybe exposing him to some artifacts that were actually on the ship might help, or it couldn't hurt. So they take him and they just watch in awe as he walks around the museum and he looks at every piece that they had and studies it. And where other 4-year-olds are running around, it's hard to get them focused.
Right.
Like I experienced this a couple weeks ago with my kids in an exhibit in LA. Like they thought it was cool and it was awesome and stuff, and they'd glance at this and that, but they weren't like, ooh.
Right? Because I went to the same exhibit and I was like, gotta read this, gotta read this, gotta read this. Like, you spend a long time in each room if you really absorb it.
Yeah, if you're not a 4-year-old kid.
Yeah, exactly. Like,
If you're not a normal 4-year-old.
yeah.
But they noticed how the other kids were just, going a little nuts, but Jamie was just focused in on every single thing, and he wanted to read everything and see everything and look at everything. And so he goes through it, and a couple of nights later, his mom is home alone with him as he's sleeping, and she just hears pounding on the wall. And she runs into his room and she finds Jamie on all fours, peering over the side of the bed, staring down at the floor and just shaking, convulsing, she describes it as. Just with fear in his eyes. And then he screams, "She's going down." And she describes it as not Jamie's voice, but a grown man's voice that comes out of his body.
Ooh.
And after that, he just kind of laid down and went back to sleep. And eventually the drawing started to fade. The talking about it faded from when he was drawing every day to it went to like 3 days. He'd mentioned Titanic 2 days a week to 1 day a week. And it slowly just faded.
Wow.
And so the family thinks that exposing him to the exhibit, being able offering him the opportunity to connect with the things, unlocked something, some closure, some way that he could live out the end of that other past life again and let go of it. Let it go. But now, at least last YouTube video they made, he's a regular kid in college. He's living a normal life. He acknowledges that he says he was probably Thomas Andrews in a past life, and he's cool with that, and he's let it go, and he's still very interested in engineering, and he is in college studying engineering.
Wow, that's really interesting.
I brought that up to you because I also in researching that story, I told you over chat, I found 2 other people who claim to be Thomas Andrews in a past life, and all 3 of these people are living today.
Whoa.
And I'll just touch on them. There's an author by the name of William C. Barnes who is a spiritual exploratory author. He wrote a book called Thomas Andrews: A Past Life Memory. He says that from the age of 4, he began drawing startlingly accurate pictures of the Titanic. He told his mom, "This was my ship, but it died." She kind of joked. She thought it was a joke. She laughed about it. But then he started asking about his uncles and aunts that she had never heard of.
Oh.
He started asking people to call him Tommy. When he was in high school in Columbus, Ohio, he was staring out the window at, I don't remember if it was Columbus, but in Ohio,
Yeah.
he was staring out the window of his algebra class at the ice on Lake Erie, and he got panicked and started running up and down the aisles of his class telling people to get to the boats. There wasn't much time. He got suspended for this big scene that he made. So he started doing past life regressions with a hypnotherapist. And when he would do that, a deep Irish brogue would come out, and he would just start to recall with accuracy things from Thomas Andrews' childhood. The fact that he worked as a beekeeper as a kid. He lived in the small Irish town of Comer, and he knew everything straight to, and he would recount to his hypnotherapist how Thomas Andrews died, and nobody even really knows exactly, but he said he knew the moments. He was on the deck, a smokestack fell, one of the ladders hooked onto his clothes, and he couldn't get free from it, and it just took him down. Like, these aren't things that anybody knew or said, and he claims to have lived it, and he's written several books about it, and you can actually find his website at williamcbarnes.com.
Interesting. Well, we do talk a little bit with our guest about, she brought up the fact that sometimes people can see other people's past lives.
Yeah, and I was saying in the chat during your stories, like that is another theory of mine. Like, maybe every spirit has a different tuning, like a radio frequency, and we just connect with different frequencies.
Right.
And we pick up, I don't know, energy.
Right.
That is that our soul attracts, and maybe
it's
memories are interwoven into them. Maybe it's not somebody's soul, but memories
but a memory,
that are part of the energy.
Because I talk about too a little bit in our interview too, how like I feel like if you're looking for some kind of rational explanation for all of this, we talk about like the timeline and the possibility of time travel. And I sometimes wonder if that's possible to tune in to different times.
Sure.
So perhaps it's not necessarily a life that you lived, but a life that you can access.
Tune into. Yeah.
We didn't talk too much about that, but that it is a possible explanation for multiple people having these experiences about the same person. But who knows?
Well, one of the most famous accounts, and one that is studied in this Carol Bowman at the University of West Virginia, or what do you say?
U of A, University of Virginia.
Of Virginia.
Yeah.
She's a past life. She's like a trailblazer in that.
And that's the university I mentioned in my story, in case anybody missed it. At U of A, they study past lives rigorously and like as a science. So they put parameters and they research. Like if somebody comes to them and says, "Here is my history. Here are the names I remember." They go and they look for these people, whether they're famous or not. A lot of times I'd imagine it's harder to verify somebody who's talking about famous people because that information is easily accessible. But they really are, like I said, very rigorous about it. It's a very scientific study.
And I forget how our interview guest referred to it, but there's two different types of past lives and people who experience and what they're looking for. Like some people are fact-based and want to find the research and to prove that it happened through research. And other people just want to find the experience and see how that helps them right now.
Yeah, she was saying it's more of like a healing process for some people. Yeah.
So this, I mentioned Carol Bowman because she's a pioneer and she has a website with a forum on it. And that's where I found the third story. And another gentleman who claims he seems to think he was also Thomas Andrews on the Titanic's architect, which is, I mean, totally understandable. Like, especially after I think Titanic is something that is very popular and it has been for many, many years, even before the movie came out. People are fascinated with it. And it's interesting just to do a Google search of Titanic past lives and just see how many people claim to have been on the Titanic and died on Titanic. It's pretty wild. But Carol Bowman, also a big part of the research that anyone who's going through her studies, they are introduced to my last and final story, and that is the story of James Leininger. James was... still is, I believe. He's still alive. So I'll say James is a young man. When he was 18 months, he started to show a fascination of airplanes. So his parents at the time, Bruce and Andrea, they're still his parents, but at the time, they, didn't think anything of it. Lots of kids. I remember when Noah was born, like cars, construction vehicles were just his thing. And so little James, interesting that the Titanic one was Jamie, but little James was a year and a half when he started to really show his parents that he was super into airplanes. So when he was about 22 months old, a couple months before his second birthday, they decided to take him to an airplane museum. And when they did, he spent most of the time there in the World War II area, wing of the museum, walking around World War II fighters and pointing at certain things and saying words that his parents didn't quite understand, or he was trying to tell them something or explain stuff to them that they were just like, okay, cool, you think it's interesting, great. He was just magnetically drawn to the World War II fighters. A couple months later, actually shortly, 2 weeks after turning 2 years old, James, just like Jamie in our last story, started experiencing night terrors. He would wake up in the middle of the night, just screaming. His mom would run into the room and find him on his back, just kicking his feet up into the air and screaming like he was about to die. And she would wake him up, and this would happen 4 to 6 nights a week. The same thing. She would come in, he'd be kicking up in the air. She'd say, "What's wrong? What's wrong?" And he would tell her, "Plane on fire, little man, get out."
Oh.
Plane on fire, little man can't get out. I'm sorry.
Wow.
And so she thought that was horribly a terrible nightmare to be having over and over and over again. So after this was happening for a couple of weeks, his parents started asking him questions after he would wake up. His mom would ask him, who's the little man? Who's the little man that can't get out? And he would say, it was me. So his dad said, what happened to your plane? And he'd say, it was shot. And he's literally just turned 2 years old.
Yeah, that's what I was like, this kid's really young.
Yeah. Dad asked, who shot your plane? And James says, Japanese. And so his parents are like, this...
Like, have you even taught your son that word? Like, where would he have
pretty wild. Yeah. So they just kind of, like, this would go on and on, as I mentioned, at least 4 nights a week. And by the time he was 3 years old, they had asked him more questions. His dad wanted to know why he thought it was Japanese that shot his plane, and he told him because of the big red sun.
Okay.
His dad asked him how they shot his plane, and he said they shot him in the front of the plane, and he went straight into the water. And they started to notice that he wouldn't talk about it when he was like wide awake. It would only be as he was getting tired at night, or if it was right after a night terror in the middle of the night when they woke him up. Around that time that he turned 3, he started drawing constantly, just like Jamie in our last story. He would draw air battles, dogfight battles, with planes and ships in the water and bullets and fire. And he would start signing them James 3. And his mom asked him, why are you signing these James 3? And he would tell her, because I'm the third James. But his dad's name is Bruce.
Right.
He's not the third James. He's just the first James.
Uh-huh.
So finally, Andrea, his mom's mom, grandma, suggested maybe he's remembering memories from a past life. And Andrea, the mom, said, yeah, that's really the only thing that makes sense. And Dad, Bruce, was like, nope, nope, I don't. Nope, that's not what's happening. And I will prove that's not what's happening. Bruce was a businessman. He was very
Yeah.
fact-driven, research-based.
Nope.
And maybe he was a little scared, but he wanted to prove it wrong. So he started to dig into the research. And at the time, like, searching things on the internet was tough. And it was like, where do you even start to Google search?
Yeah.
What's going on with my kid at this point?
And I also think it's interesting because I started thinking about it. Like, he's trying to prove it wrong, which is actually, I think, a really interesting way to research this kind of thing rather than trying to research to prove yourself right.
Oh, yeah.
I think you should research to prove yourself wrong. Like, go every avenue that you can think of, not looking to back yourself up. Because then I feel like you can get so biased and pick up any little thing. Right?
Absolutely.
So I think it's important to have somebody like that.
100%, especially the person telling the story. Because the kid's not going to the press with this.
Right.
The parents are. So you better come with a strong anti.
Yes,
or at least
you gotta be
we
ready.
did our research game. So Bruce starts to ask him more questions so he can get more, or at least get more direction for his research, since it's all so vague at this point. And he asks James one night when he has the opportunity if he knows what kind of plane he was flying. And James says yes, it was a Corsair, which, I mean,
how would he know?
To me that's a keyboard. That's like a gaming keyboard. I don't know that there's a plane called Corsair, but James does. His dad asked him, where did you fly from? And he said, from a boat. And so Bruce says, what do you remember the name of your boat? And he says, the Natoma. So his dad goes to his research and he finds that there is a aircraft carrier called the USS Natoma Bay, which was used in the Pacific Theater in World War II.
Wow. And
he does a little bit more digging and he finds, whew, we're not crazy. There's no Corsairs on the Natoma Bay, because that would have been crazy if there was Corsairs on the ship he said that he took off from. But he's got all this research out. He's doing the homework. One morning, he's looking through a book at breakfast at the breakfast table, and he's got a page open. And James looks over and he says, there, next to that island, that's where I was shot down. And his dad goes, right there? And he says, yeah. It was the Battle of Iwo Jima. And I believe the sea or the body of water was called Chichijima. I didn't write it down, but I thought it was a funny name, and it reminded me of Chi-Chi's restaurant by over where you live.
That's how you remember.
I was like, that's how I'm going to remember it, Chichijima. And his dad goes, oh, okay, so your Corsair was shot down here. And he says, no, my plane was shot down there. And so now he's got a battle. Dad's got the battle. Dad's got the ship. And so he says, okay, can you remember names of any other people that were with you? And James says, Jack Larson was there. And that's pretty specific.
Right?
Again, for a 3-year-old.
Yeah, that's what I keep going back. Like, how do these little kids do this other than remembering?
So Bruce digs into this list of fighters who lost their lives in the Battle of Iwo Jima. He finds that there was one pilot who had taken off from the USS Natoma that perished in that battle. And his name was James Houston Jr.
Oh, so he was the second one.
Which, if James Leininger is remembering James Houston Jr., that would make him James 3. So Bruce, dad, looks into James Houston, finds that he was a pilot who flew a Corsair up until he got to the Battle of Iwo Jima. Since there were no Corsairs on the USS Natoma, he had a different fighter plane. And he looks at the roster of people who fought alongside James Houston, and there is a Jack Larson.
Wow.
He happened to be the pilot that was flying closest to and next to James Houston when his plane was shot right in the nose, and it went down in the water right next to the island in Chichijima, where his 3, maybe 4-year-old now is recalling these memories from.
Mm-hmm.
Meanwhile, Mom, Andrea, is researching James Houston's family, and it's the research back then. This is like pre-FaceTime or Facebook and stuff, so it took a while. But 6 or 8 weeks later, after they made this determination, she found a sister of James Houston, Anne, and she gives her a phone call. And of course, she can't say, "Hi, 80-year-old woman. My
Right.
son claims to be your brother, reincarnated." So she just says, "Hi, we're really interested in this battle and everyone who took part in it. Could you please send us some photos of your brother?" And so she's like, "Sure." So she sends photos to the family, and the second Mom lays eyes on these photos, she's like, "That's my boy."
Oh.
Like, this is such a weird connection, but
So it actually
him,
looks
no
like
doubt.
him too?
She could just see in his eyes, I
Wow.
guess. Like, she just had this feeling like that's him.
Okay.
So they set up this meeting with Anne, and they meet with this 80-year-old woman, and little James walks right up to her, gives her a hug, and says, "Hi, Annie. It's great to see you." And nobody told him that her brother used to call her Annie, but he knew. And she gave him a couple of tchotchkes that James, her brother, had owned in his lifetime, and they'd say, "Remember this?" One was a bust of George Washington, and James said, "Yeah, that goes on my desk."
Oh.
And Annie's like, "Yep, that's where you kept it." And so Annie came along away from that meeting going, "Yeah, there's no other explanation. That reincarnate, that's my brother."
Mm-hmm.
And so this was just a huge part of their lives in James's childhood, and the parents really felt like, wanting to give their son a normal life,
Mm-hmm.
they had to kind of figure out a way to move on, to separate them.
Right.
Otherwise, he would just be living someone else's life his whole life.
Right.
So they came up with the idea of holding a memorial ceremony for James Houston at the spot where his plane went down.
Mm-hmm.
So they took a family trip. They went out to Japan and got a boat, got some flowers. They went out to the spot on the water where his plane went down, and they had Bruce led a little memorial ceremony for him, and they had James lay some flowers out on the water, and they said that when he did that, he stood up and saluted, and he said, "James Houston, I will never forget you." And he sat down and he cried for 20 minutes, and they headed back, and that was really a release and closure for him, just like we talked about Jamie and going to the museum and having the final death dream. And they have interviews now. I saw one from like 8 months ago of James, and he's in college now. He's a musician. He plays guitar.
Oh, cool.
But he's hoping to go into the Marines.
Oh, he should be on our show.
Yeah.
Like,
He
"Hey, James."
says it's James Houston is still a huge part of my life. Like I remember him every day, but I have to live my own life, and I will honor his memory, and I know that he's a big part of me. But here, I will bring the best parts of him along with me on my journey and live my own life. And so That is the story of James Leininger.
Wow. That was excellent.
Thanks. And I mentioned with both of these tales, if you want to see any images or videos I described, feel free to Google after the show tonight, and you can see images and videos of these kids as today they're in college now.
Mm-hmm.
It's wild.
And it's really interesting that they still, these ones that we talked about have retained those memories. And again, because if it wasn't real, it's like at a certain point, they'd be like, yeah, my mom, did this, or, or yeah, maybe, you feel like they would be more skeptical as they get older and you learn more and you're like, yeah, I would probably just imagine that. But they hold to it because it was a real experience,
Yeah, and I mean, with every story, there's going to be people who say that's bull hunky.
Yeah.
I watched a 20-minute YouTube video today by somebody who could prove everything in James Leininger's story wrong, or a way that the family doctored it, or planted the images in his mind that made this happen. Like, so just with any tale, there's going to be people who say, well, no, that's not real. That didn't happen.
Not real. End of story.
So
and we talk about that a bit in our interview as well.
Yep. Yeah. Speaking of our interview.
Yes.
How did we find this guest, and how did this magic happen, Amanda?
Yeah. So I actually came across this person on Facebook. So her name is Rosa. And so Rosa has a PhD in astrophysics, but is also a past life regression therapist. And it's really interesting to me that somebody can have this like scientific mind and this spiritual side, and they don't collide. Because a lot of times in our world, and I think I say this too, so sorry if you hear it twice, but a lot of times in our world, you are one or the other, and there's nothing in between you. They're almost always at odds, or you just kind of make peace. Yep. Okay.
Yeah. And I found it so fascinating. And I found myself during the interview thinking to myself so many times, for our Vaudacity family out there, I'd love to watch her and Hunter sit down and just chat.
Yes, me too. I think it'd be really interesting. I think it's one of those things where it's like, it probably at times would get very heated, and then times that it would just be like, oh, this is so cool. Like, it would be a really interesting chat.
But our chat with her was very interesting as well.
Yes.
And are we ready to share it?
I think so. Yeah. So, we have an interview. So it is, just so you guys are prepared. It is an hour, but we will be back to, wrap up and say goodnight. But so if you fall asleep, if you're tired, come back, because it is a really interesting talk, and I think that you'll enjoy it. So, yeah.
And we still have our duet.
Yeah, we still have our duet to do.
Oh, good. Hunter's here. He's going to enjoy.
Yeah, Hunter's already like, I'd be curious. Well, watch this interview, and then we'll see. Maybe we'll have to do it a special.
And if you want to find her, she is Rosa Hope, or It's Rosa Hope on Instagram.
All right, here we go. Enjoy. Welcome to the Magical Mystery Hour, Rosa Hope, who is joining us from Raleigh, North Carolina, and is currently pursuing her degree in astrophysics. Hi.
Thank you. Hi. Yeah, it's very nice to be here with you all. So I'm finishing my PhD right now, but that's actually not why I'm here today. I'm also a trained transpersonal hypnotist and have over 6 years of experience working with clients in what I would call abstract regression, but one version of that is what's better known as past life regression.
That is amazing.
So cool. I feel like there's kind of an interesting perspective here, simply because I have this background in the hard sciences and have spent a lot of time doing that. And then on the other side, past lives and so forth, pretty much spiritual in nature. What's the intersection here?
Right.
I love that. I love having these two big things in people's lives just kind of intertwined when so many people see them as something completely separate and at odds all the time.
How did you get into hypnosis?
Oh, well, funny story. So I came into it as a client. So I had PTSD symptoms and had been going to therapy for ages and had spent a lot of time like unpacking it. I understood what was going on. Like I had sort of intellectually moved on and so forth, but I was still having symptoms and trouble sleeping and stuff like that. And at the time I was living in Santa Cruz, California. Which I mentioned to y'all before, sort of like the woo capital of America, as far as I'm concerned. And at that point, I was like, look, I need to sleep. Who can help me? And so I kind of looked around and was like, well, what else is out there? And I found, short version, it's like I found this mountain man in the woods who practiced hypnosis. And I went in and talked to him and was like, look, whatever you can do. And essentially in one session, all of the issues got resolved. And I never had another symptom. And it completely blew my mind and led me on this completely different path. Because I thought to myself, if this method is so powerful, why isn't this just healthcare? Like, why doesn't everyone have access to this? Why don't we all know about this?
Sure.
It has so much power to help people in their lives and to be transformational for them. And I'm the type of person that always kind of looks around and is like, well, if no one else is doing it, I had better do it. So then I ended up going and training I took the certifications and did all this kind of stuff in tandem with the first 2 years of my astrophysics PhD. So that was sort of interesting that it all kind of started at the same time and has been rolling along here together. So I am now in practice, at least part-time, as a transpersonal hypnotist while I'm finishing my dissertation. So
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah. I don't know how you find time for all that.
I know.
You never find time, you only ever make it. But I also am lucky to have a very supportive spouse who just sort of believes in me. So it's like I come across something, I'm like, I feel like I need to do this. And he's like, okay, I believe in you. And there we have it. So
Amazing. And that is vital for, pursuing your passions in life, as having, finding the partner that's got your back every step of the way.
So important.
That's amazing. So as you start your hypnosis journey, I almost said hypnotic journey, but that sounds not really what we're talking about here. As you explore it as therapy, you just kind of stumble upon past lives, or how did that come to be?
So it doesn't take long, like moving, as you're learning about regressions and so forth, it doesn't take long to learn about Dolores Cannon. So Dolores Cannon, she's a little bit niche, but she developed her own branch of transpersonal hypnosis called quantum healing hypnosis technique. And that's what I ended up getting certified in. There's another branch of transpersonal hypnosis that is taught out of the ARE, which was, that's sort of like the Edgar Cayce Institute. If y'all have heard about him, he was called the Sleeping Prophet back in the early 1900s. And he is also very famous for giving very helpful healthcare information, as well as regressions and prophecy and other types of things. But the rabbit hole gets pretty deep pretty quick. Mm-hmm. So if you just go look up, transpersonal hypnosis, you're down the slide. So when you're doing quantum healing hypnosis technique, there are a couple different stages. And one of the earliest stages in it is a regression. Past life regression has been around for like 70, 80 years now, and was discovered quite by accident. No one knew they were going to do this, but what they were doing is taking clients into regression in their current life. So trying to take them back to their childhood to try to do therapy there. Mm-hmm. However, different people started to find in their own individual practice that sometimes their clients would regress to something completely different. And it was not their childhood. They were another person. They were describing things from a different time, from a different country. And at first that was very disorienting. But the first sort of popularized past life regression was a book called The Search for Bridie Murphy, which again is, I don't remember if it was like the 1940s or something, but it was quite some time ago. before the West, it's like the West has sort of had these obsessions with the East a couple times in modern history. So Orientalism was very popular during the Victorian era. Then everyone kind of like forgot about it. And then when past life regression and the 60s happened, we all got very interested in Eastern esoteric traditions and stuff again. So it's like past life regression reminded the West of the concept of reincarnation, as if we'd forgotten or something. But anyway, it's like we kind of brushed it under the rug. This brought it back up. Then the psychedelic movement and so forth brought these things back into the fore. And it's just, it's sort of like our culture trying to find a spiritual framework that's going to work, because the one we have is more like punitive and isn't really about the development of the soul over eons. Whereas in these more Eastern, in Eastern mysticism, there's an understanding that our spiritual journey is a lot longer than just one human life, and that what you're working towards isn't like pleasing somebody in the sky or something like that. So it's about the individual's evolution into divine nature rather than trying to, it's less hierarchical, if that makes sense.
I remember I first got into it years ago. I was raiding my mother's bookshelf, and she's very into the new age stuff. And I stumbled across a book called Many Lives, Many Masters. And just reading through that, and the author Brian Weiss, he mentioned it's called that because he found that as he was doing these therapies with people, in each life, people would recognize other spirits that they've had the journey with. They would wake up in it somewhere, and then he'd say, who is that? Oh, it's my sister. But now in this life, it was my boss. Like we all are on this cyclical, eonical journey together. And so I love what you said about how it's not about living this life for your God or your religion or for this life. Your soul is on a multi-life journey.
Right. And so, well, I guess this is a very historical conversation so far, but it's like we discover past life regression, and you can kind of develop whatever framework you want for why it's happening and what is happening. For me, I'm like way less interested in being right, and I'm much more interested in helping people. So it's like I have a working framework, but ultimately you have to take the information you have available, combine it with the experiences that you've had, and figure out the framework that makes the most sense for what is going on. So I can give you examples, but essentially I think about consciousness like it's a tuner, like a radio tuner. And that when we're undergoing a regression, it's not like something physical is coming out of the body, going somewhere else or something like that. It's more that you're just changing the channel. And hypnosis does this anyway, and sleep does it anyway. Your consciousness is changing channels all the time. Binging Netflix is changing the channel of your consciousness. You know what I mean? Right. So we're tuning in. So we're tuning out of this physical experience. So part of hypnosis is also getting super relaxed so that the needs of the body can kind of pass away. Because if the body has a lot of needs, we tune into that. And if the body's good, it's easier to tune out and find these other planes of consciousness to explore. But that's how I think about it. And when you're tuning into a past life or any other experience, it's the same as remote viewing too. It's all the same phenomena ultimately, which is you being able to master your consciousness so that you can shift into other types of perception. So if that's another human experience, cool. If it's like floating over your mom's house and checking on your dog who she's dog sitting, cool. It's like it's whatever. But the goal ultimately is being able to master that activity, that process. So when someone comes to work with me, I tell them, I don't need you to need me. What this is training for you. I'm helping you navigate shifting the levels of your consciousness so that you have access to other information, but ultimately you don't need me at all. If you keep practicing, you'll be able to do it yourself. And you can go read books on remote viewing and stuff like that and learn how to use these techniques in other ways. Also, Bob Monroe, who started the Monroe Institute in Virginia, all about getting very high level mastery of your consciousness and your levels of consciousness so that you can shift in and out at will and use it in a way that's going to better your life. Some people like it because they like getting information and they're very curious.
Mhm.
For me, the question behind my professional practice is, how do we human better?
Right.
How do we do this better in a more effective way, in a more compassionate way, in a more collaborative way? So when people come work with me, they tend to be looking at those types of things. That's where they want to grow. And so we're a match. People who are more about curiosity or just like exploring for the sake of exploring, they tend to work with other people. I'm very like practical. So
That.
Yes. And
And
Paul,
so
have you ever done any kind of hypnosis or anything like that?
not
yeah,
hyp- not hypnosis. I have only like she's taking off memories that I have of experiences that I've had while meditating. Like I
That's what
kind
I
of
was thinking too.
no
I'm curious.
distinction. They're different. They're just different paths of the same mountain.
Oh,
Mm,
okay.
So meditation, remember, when you're learning meditation, usually you have some type of teacher, someone who's helping you navigate what meditation might feel like and helping you get used to using that method. But like I said, it's many paths up the mountain. When you're meditating and you're shifting your states of consciousness, it's exactly the same thing. Hypnosis is very, very similar. It's just having more like one-on-one support every step of the way, because there's a conversation happening. Whereas in meditation, it's like, I've given you some background, I've given you the space, now you go do it. Hypnosis is like we're holding hands
yeah.
while you're
Okay.
doing it. So yeah,
Great to
and
know.
right. And if you've had experiences of this nature when you're meditating, I'm just like, good, you're on your way, you're doing it, you're already
You know
doing it.
what? I told this story on our first episode, but let me get your kind of take on it. Whether it's a dream or something more. I said the first time that I tried meditating, I was feeling like really, really relaxed. And all of a sudden, it was like I got this vision. And I was like, what? And I was looking through somebody else's eyes. I was in a bed and somebody was looking down at me and they were just kind of talking to me and like saying, "Oh, it's okay. It's okay." And they were talking to me like I almost felt like I was like an older woman maybe dying or sick or something. Um and like maybe it was my daughter looking at me saying like, "Oh, it's okay, mom," or something. And it was very strange. And then I like it was so weird to me that I like opened my eyes, it jolted me out and I was like, I've never felt like that before. It was really weird.
Oh yeah, well, of course. And it's like it again, you're tuning into
Yeah.
this other experience. Honestly, the first time I had an experience like that, I was getting a tattoo and I hadn't eaten anything that day and I fainted.
Oh no.
And when I fainted, I experienced an entire lifetime as a Civil War soldier.
What?
And then I
Whoa.
came to like 15 seconds later and I was just like, I could not, I didn't even know what to do with it, because my sense of time, I had like lived this other life and had a family and like all this other stuff. And I was out for maybe 15 seconds. It was very strange.
Yeah. It was
Oh,
like the whole consciousness came into your brain at once. Kind of.
Right. It was
past life flashed before your eyes.
I know.
totally, yeah, exactly. It was like the whole life all the way through. And I'm also laughing because there's like a Star Trek Next Generation episode where that happens to Jean-Luc Picard.
That's exactly what I was thinking of.
They're
I was
so
like,
ahead of their
little
time.
Was that your first experience with past life regression?
Yeah, I mean, it must have been. I was pretty hardcore in my early 20s. I was going pretty hard in those days.
Uh-huh.
So I just didn't know what to make of it. I just kind of was like, well, that was really strange. I'm embarrassed for fainting, kind of like moved on. But I got a little older, had an opportunity to have like more mystical experience. But frankly, it's where I sit now. I don't know. It's really interesting. A lot of times, especially in the 1900s, people spent a lot of energy trying to validate past life regressions. So folks would get a very highly detailed regression and everyone would be like going back into records and like trying to find these people and find the family. And there's actually a lot of evidence of this kind. So if you're interested in like backed up like evidence-based regression. There is a department at, well, maybe it's not a department, it's inside of maybe the psychology department or something at UVA, which is the University of Virginia, but it's called the Division of Perceptual Studies. And if you're interested in any type of spiritual or paranormal phenomena that actually has hard evidence, they have tons of documentation in like big rooms full of archives, particularly about reincarnation. So these are actual documented instances of children, because once someone's an adult, it's like they have access to the internet or whatever. But it's children that tend to be the most compelling because they're 4 or 5 years old, giving very detailed information about their name, who they were, members of their family, what they looked like, what their names were, what their job was, how they died, and all this kind of information. And they have gone and validated with surviving family members of the deceased, and so on and so forth. One of the most famous cases, this is probably 20 years ago now, was a little boy who had been a World War II pilot and died when his plane got shot down in Japan. Y'all have probably heard this story. It's been on TV a couple of times, but that's just one example out of hundreds, maybe thousands. So like, that's where I begin. If you're like, I need some evidence. Mm-hmm. It's like evidence of what though? Is it like hard evidence that like the individual soul like exits a body and enters an embryo somewhere? Like, I'm not sure, but it's definitely evidence that memories and experiences survive death in some way.
Some sort of transfer of consciousness.
Yeah, or even just information or something. But it's like, we know there's something else happening here. Otherwise, I mean, what other way is there to explain this? Just like a highly psychic child tunes into a dead person whose siblings live 400 miles away. Like, it's, yes. Right. It's like if you're doing this sort of Occam's razor exercise to say what's the simplest information, it's just that information or experience of some kind survives death.
Yes. And so in your work, what kind of memorable experiences or past life regression memories have kind of stuck with you along the way?
Well, in the work I do, this is something else that's pretty interesting and I think is worth discussing. So for folks who do regression hypnosis in general, there's been a change over the last few decades, in that in the past, or around the turn of the century, most folks would go into a regular past life regression, meaning when you regress them, they are a human person living a life, very meat and potatoes, like they're just, it's like another human life, seems fine. But since the turn of the century, there have been more and more people regressing to other types of experiences, which is where abstract regression in transpersonal hypnosis came from, because practitioners realized past life regression was too boxed in, and the experiences people were having went beyond that. So now many of us do what's called abstract regression, which is instead of leading a client to a past life, we just say you're going to land wherever you need to land. And for me, it's like you're going to land where there's information that's going to help you the best we can right now. So it's very specific in that way. So for me, it's like, what's the most helpful to you? The stuff you're working on. And then wherever you land is wherever you land. So in a sense, every single client's experience is totally unique. So I'm learning all the time. You get very comfortable with the unexpected because, it can be any level of life as an animal, life as a spirit, some sort of disembodied glowing orb. I've had clients live experiences as a machine, as an alien, as a star. It's what, look, it's like the universe is the limit, whatever you can think of. So things get strange very quickly.
So how would you say, like, as far as like something about like a machine, right? So a machine so far doesn't have a consciousness. We might be getting there. No, I mean, like, we're getting there. So we don't have a way to communicate. So how would their consciousness translate into something to ours that we could remember, if that makes sense?
Mhm.
That's what I'm getting
Yeah.
at. Like something that I can't understand, even if it does, let's say, have a consciousness. My guitar has a consciousness and it talks to me, but I can't hear it.
Well, but I have there are a couple things I want to address about what you said.
Yeah.
So, first of all, I'm just gonna like plant some seeds. I'm not gonna like talk about. I'm still not sure what I think about this, so like jury's still out for me. But I'm always trying to like learn.
Yeah, me too. That's why I'm like, how does this work?
Yeah, there are some very, very famous retired physicists that are positing the idea that perhaps rather than particles or subatomic particles or even energy being fundamental, being the fundamental building blocks of the universe, they are positing ideas that perhaps consciousness is the fundamental. And that consciousness, out of consciousness arises the rules that physical reality plays by, which is what we describe with math in physics. We're describing the rules that the universe interacts with itself through. And they're like, well, where would those rules come from? Like, why would these be the rules? So these guys are retired, so they're not worried about tenure or anything, but like they're putting these ideas forward. But what that would imply is that everything has consciousness, like a machine, a rock, or whatever. But I make this argument based on just living animate beings. Do you have an understanding when you meet a spider? I think a spider is conscious. Spiders make decisions. They can create intricately beautiful creations in the physical world. They are problem solvers. But do I understand a spider? Not at all. So just because a spider has a consciousness doesn't mean it's like ours. Meaning just in the living world, you can have very, very different states of consciousness. That's one of the fun things about regressing into a life as an animal, is experiencing the very different ways in which the animate world can be conscious. It's an exploration. It makes you sort of stretch your boundaries a little bit. But if we stretch even further and say, well, what about like rock consciousness or something like that? It's like, well, you could ask yourself and just do like an imaginative exercise and say, well, how would time feel to me if I were a mountain? How would I experience the passage of time? What would be the changes that are important to me if I'm a mountain? So it's like you can kind of play with this by, anyway. So when it comes to people that regress to a machine experience, their consciousness is just really different. The things they're concerned with are very different. They may or may not have experiences of emotion of any kind. Emotion tends to be very like mammalian in a way.
Yeah.
So when people regress to a life as a fish, they don't have like a broad palette of emotions. Like mammals do have this very nuanced set of emotions, and that's part of how we can work quickly spiritually, is because our emotions give us a lot of information about what we're trying to do or how we're trying to grow. But when you are a rock, your goal is probably not spiritual growth as much as it is to understand the experience of rock consciousness, so it's like very basic, and the lessons you're working on are different. Again, to me, it's not really a hierarchical thing. So in Hinduism, there's this concept that if you're successful in your spiritual development, you kind of go up this food chain, through like this system of like you get a better life each time, or higher status or something like that. I'm not sure that's the case, but that's also because that assumes that time is linear and that you're only going in one direction. So there's like a clear progression and like an arrow of time. But the more time you spend having mystical experience, the more you're going to start to question if time is linear in the first place. In the physical world, there's a reason for linear time. And from a physics standpoint, I would argue the answer to that is entropy, because in total entropy of the universe, which can be described in very simple terms as disorder, only increases in time. Locally, it can decrease. Like when you build a Lego set into a castle, you've locally decreased the entropy by like turning it into a form. But you've created a lot of heat and burned a lot of calories, like working through that. So it's like in the total environment, the entropy has increased because you've emitted heat, you've digested food, you've done all this other stuff that has sort of like broken things down in order to create a localized decrease in entropy. So globally, meaning in the whole universe, entropy only goes up. And essentially that lets you define the direction that time goes, because many other laws of physics don't need to have an arrow of time.
Right.
We can always follow it if we follow the entropy. So,
Wow, that's
yeah.
interesting.
But on the spiritual side, none of this stuff matters anyway. So if you kind of go over there and you're like looking at, you're like doing past life regression or whatever, in transpersonal regression, you can always do like future regressions too, or you can do remote viewing, which is essentially the same thing, but right now and looking at someone else's situation. So it's like time doesn't really matter. Your development is happening in all directions at once. And tuning into a different time in history is just giving you like a mile marker in the physical world. But it's like physicality requires an arrow of time. If we're dealing with the non-physical, it's like, well, we don't really need it.
Yeah. So I've always had this theory, and I feel like actually it kind of sits in a bit with what you're saying, is that like people who are, psychic, let's say, I always thought that perhaps it actually had something to do with our timeline. Somehow your experience of time is different, and you can tune in, just like you were saying, to another point in time. And like, let's say I dream something that's going to happen. Right. Because I feel like I've had dreams where I'm like, whoa, that actually happened. I can't believe it. Right. I thought, well, maybe if somehow I can tune into this cycle and it can come to me in a dream rather than just being like, oh, I'm psychic and I can predict the future.
Yeah. Well, that's actually that idea has been brought forth by different philosophers over time. The idea of circular time. It's really it's like there are reasons why I like it and reasons why I don't. So I like it in the sense that it firmly defines a natural order of things.
Yeah.
And it lets us let go of outcome and say whatever will be was meant to be.
Yeah.
But it also completely strips us of free will.
Right.
And from my own, not just personal experience, but my experience with my clients as well, free will is actually the tool we're using for our spiritual development.
Right.
And otherwise we're just throwing ourselves down the hill and hoping that like every impact is perfecting us, which is one way to do things, but that's like the most painful way.
Right.
Whatever comes,
Yeah.
But by using our free will, we get a chance to direct our growth. We get to be the gardener for our own tree in a way. So it's like you get to choose what branches will you prune rather than what branches do you let the hurricane pull off,
Right.
You get to be a part of the process. And when you're dealing with circular time, there is no free will, because it's like it's a clockwork universe.
Right.
And some physics generally doesn't align with clockwork universe anymore. That's old physics. That's physics 101. So that's like mechanics, which says that on a large scale, you can predict what's going to happen based on what's happened in the past because of natural laws. However, starting in the early 1900s with the development of quantum mechanics, we learned, maybe not on a big scale, though in the lab the scale's getting bigger and bigger, but on the most minute scales, the universe follows laws of probability, which means that there is actually no way to predict the state of a particle until it is measured, because it exists as a probability distribution until you make a measurement. And for me, making that measurement it's the analog, or the proxy, I would say, of free will. Free will is when we make a call. It's when we make a decision. It's the same way as taking a measurement, which is saying, I need to know where that particle is. And you measure it, and now it has to decide where it's located or something. It's the same kind of thing. It's an inflection point in the existence of your well, am I talking about particles or am I talking about people? It's a point where a decision has to be made.
Right.
The particle has to have a location if we're measuring its location. A call gets made. And that's how I think about my free will too, is that I don't try to implement my will all the time. In fact, I work very hard on allowing myself to just sort of be in my experience, but to pay really close attention to where my options show up? Like, what are the opportunities to exercise my free will, and then to try to do it masterfully so that I can live a good life and have a positive impact on the people around me. So it's like, I always am really wary of any ideas that try to take away our free will, because I've just seen it lead to people being irresponsible.
I would ask, what are your favorite experiences personally, or that you've led clients through, how guided them through, that relate specifically to past life regression?
Like my favorite, well, if we're just talking about regular old human past lives, it's like I have a personal experience. Part of
we would love that.
Right. Part of training in quantum healing hypnosis technique usually involves working with other trainees too. So I've been a client for a lot of other people who were training. And one of my favorite experiences, I regressed to a past life in a very like nature-centric society. So it wasn't super material. Everyone had like a very simple house or kind of hut, and it was very communal living. So the entire village essentially was like a big family. And it didn't matter if someone was actually your sister. It was like, we are brethren, and the family ties were almost secondary to that. And it was a deeply beautiful and emotional experience. The regression actually began with me in a tree, gazing out at the universe and longing for something more, longing to explore, longing to see more of the world. And then I had to go back, and I found myself in the village, surrounded by people I loved. And there was a woman who was like my auntie, who was teaching me how to cook some kind of potato pancake thing. And it sounds very mundane, but just the level of rapport inside of the community, and the care, and the fact that there was so much to be valued just in the day-to-day interactions, watching kids grow up, being there for each other, helping each other with whatever the needs were, and like finding roles in that society where your gifts could come to bear fruit and stuff like that. And in that life, I never did leave the village. I never explored. I never left. I never even had a partner or anything. I ended up being some kind of like old maid in that village. But it was a deeply rewarding life. And at the end of that life, in the technique that I use, we go through the death experience when we have a past life. And I went through the death experience, and your awareness is sitting on the other side doing this kind of life review and looking at what you've been through and what it meant. And there were two things that came through that were really powerful for me at the time. The first was that the purpose of that life was understanding the importance of community. And that community isn't just like a buzzword where we sort of galvanize behind the same cause. It's not even about that. Like, that's kind of like organizing, but community is actually about love. It's about compassion. It's about being a part of something greater than yourself without it being like a mission or a job or a cause. It's like, just together, we are greater than the sum of our parts. We are full of beautiful gifts and offerings and perspectives and points of view. And if we all can appreciate that about each other, then we all have that sense of belonging and that sense of being seen and heard. And, a lot of the upset we feel in our daily lives comes from feeling like we don't belong, or that like you don't understand what I'm saying or something like that. And community is really about doing that kind of practice with a lot of people. And so that gave me a really clear focus for the next stage of my life, which is now. And that's about building community and being able to interface with people that have so many different perspectives, and really understanding that the human condition deeply binds us all, and that we can all help each other, maybe in really unexpected ways, if we can respect each other enough to listen. The other thing that came through was that longing. It was like this heartsick longing for the stars, or for exploring, for having a bigger life than the one that was before me. And my question was like, well, what was that all about? I like wanted to leave the whole time. And the message that came through with that deep longing, that kind of hole in our heart that says there's more out there, is actually there to remind us of our spiritual nature. It's to keep our minds open, that desire to be free, understanding that like what lays beyond the human life is not to be feared, it's an adventure. All of this is an adventure. And that longing shouldn't make us feel heartsick and shouldn't make us feel like our lives aren't enough. It should make us remember our divine nature, that we are members of this beautiful corporeal physical universe, but that it's a beautiful structure or machine or organism or whatever you want to call it that is here for us to experience. It should enrich our lives and remind us to appreciate our lives instead of just don't call it emptiness. That longing is trying to remind you of who you are. So those things really stuck with me. And that was a really powerful experience. Yeah.
I love everything about that. Now I'm like, I want to go have that experience.
I know.
Where do I
I know.
Where do I get a ticket for that?
I know. Well, and one thing, so how do you, because I don't know if there's a thing, that kind of clicks, but how do you feel like you can define a genuine past life experience versus like when I was a kid? We talk about this all the time, Paul and I, but like I was obsessed with Titanic, and I would be like, oh, if I, and I would imagine my life on Titanic, and it seems so real, and so I could see how I'd be like, well, maybe I was really on the Titanic. How do you make a distinction between something that your brain is really imagining versus like, this was my past life?
Or can you?
Yeah.
That's what I mean. Can you?
Right. That's a very interesting question, and I don't know if you're going to like my answer. So,
okay.
You can focus a lot on evidentiary past lives if that's your thing.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want to know for sure, you can go get yourself a past life regression and try to find out the names of people that you're seeing, and you can try to like do detective work in that space and then come back and look at the records, because if you read it all already, it's kind of too late. But it's like, if
right?
you don't know what the passenger roster was or something, you can go have this experience and try to meet and talk to people and find out who they are, and then come back and check historical records, and that will be enough for you.
Right.
That's what the Division of Perceptual Studies has done at UVA.
Mm-hmm.
For me, none of that matters. Mm-hmm. Your brain doesn't know the difference between a real experience and an imagined experience.
Yes.
You give it a context to help yourself ground in physical reality so you can function. But ultimately, studies have shown that, for example, if you're a basketball player and you close your eyes and imagine what it's like to, shoot a three-pointer 100 times, or you go and practice shooting a three-pointer 100 times, the difference statistically in your improvement is not noticeable.
Right.
So your imagination is that powerful. You can create a real experience as far as your brain is concerned using your imagination. For me, I actually don't think this stuff is important. I don't think it matters if it was a real past life or not. And here's my argument. Sometimes I have had experiences with my clients and with myself where they have tuned into someone else's past life.
Ooh.
So they're not actually in the person having the experience. They're sort of like floating as a witness and watching it happen, and then realizing who it is that they're seeing. And they're getting this information because it's helpful to maybe a fraught relationship with that person. So it's like they need the context in order to do some work that they have ahead of them right now.
Interesting.
To me, that points to the fact that our consciousness isn't really individuated. In our bodies, it is mostly. But at the same time, if you're in the room with your partner and they're having a really hard day, even if you don't know anything that's happened, can't you feel it?
Mm-hmm.
You know. So like our consciousness bleeds into each other. And what that means is, even if it's not your past life, it's someone else's, it's still yours anyway. Collectively, really cool. We share consciousness in this sort of like umbrella level anyhow. So it's like you might be accessing some other individual's previous life, but if it's helpful to you now, that's why you're accessing it. If you have no control over your tuner and it's like, I keep tapping into all sorts of different lives, that's usually how psychics end up discovering their psychic, because they're like seeing someone else's experience and they're like, this doesn't feel like it's mine. You know what I mean? So it's like, it's all the same process ultimately. I also think that we have immense creative power, and that even if you're creating an experience, like if all the work I've ever done with my clients ends up just being some kind of imaginative exercise, well, doesn't the whole thing break down? And my answer to that is no, because it still helps them. It actually helps them. I have had clients actually heal injuries, things that would have required surgery that now don't. Relationships that were very fraught and that now are filled with peace, letting go of things that were just hurting them or causing them to be sick because they were holding a grudge, and it's not hurting the other person, it's just hurting them, you know? So it's like, is it actually working, and is it actually improving people's lives and their ability to relate with other people? Yes. So to me, it's less important if the experience was like historically accurate or something. What's more important is, what are you learning from it? And that's true about your current life right now. It doesn't have to be a past life. Like, what are you learning from your own experience right now today?
Yeah.
You know, so
much I'm learning today. I love
well,
it.
right. So, but it's like, you decide what your values are. I'm not super evidentiary because I didn't get into this to be a detective. I didn't get into it to be an investigator. I got into it to help people. But there are other practitioners you can find that are super into like the history stuff. That's just not me.
Is there any thought about like some kind of training in this life in order to try and up your chances of remembering in the next life? Or is it a completely blank slate? Or is there no kind of thought, because it's, this is all theoretical thought, of course.
Well, I can tell you what people have written about. So it's like, I can tell you what has been in my clients' experiences and my own experience. And it's also been written about in books like Between Death and Life, and also, oh my gosh, I'm going to forget his name. There was a man, oh gosh, I can't believe it. Prolific hypnotherapist who has written a whole series of books, Michael Newton.
Okay.
He's written a whole series of books about reincarnation and the space between our reincarnations based on his clientele. So I'm just telling you what everybody says is going on. It's in Bob Monroe's books too. He wasn't doing hypnosis. He was doing astral travel, but it's all the same stuff anyway. And word on the street is that when you're between incarnations, let's say you're still on the timeline, more or less. When you're between incarnations, you first get a chance to look over how things went. And you're like, okay, I just died. It was fine. People describe it as like, you know how it feels when you stand up from a chair? It's like that. You're just up now. Okay. Yeah. And you get a chance to kind of look at how things went. You look at your life, and things that were sticky or didn't go so well, you get an opportunity to experience it, not just from your own perspective, but from the perspective of everybody else involved. Wow. So if you have led a very harmful life, you get an opportunity to have that experience from the other side and like deal with that. Wow. So in a sense, it's like, there's no punishment, there's no nothing. It's just your consciousness is expanded. So you get to experience it from all angles. It's very 360 now.
That like community.
That is exactly. It is punishment if you're a bad person, though.
Yeah.
Well, not really. You're just getting to be on every side of it. That's all. You're just returning to this more natural state of being compassionate and empathetic and going like, oh, when I hurt others, I really am hurting myself. Whoops. Right. You know, but no one's there doing this at you. It's only you.
It's yourself.
Yeah, it's yourself. So like, you're getting to experience it, and you're like, I would handle that one differently, had I but known. And then when that's done, sometimes people need a rest. So if things are pretty rough, you might go to a resting place to chill, maybe had a really tough life or made a lot of bad decisions. And you're like, dude, that was pretty rough. I'm just gonna go sleep for a while. So some people kind of go rest. Some people are like raring to go. So they're like, okay, I'm ready to go back. Usually those are younger souls that haven't done human a bunch of times. They tend to be like, that was fine. I could do it. Send me back down there. But folks who have been around a couple times, there's usually something they want to do. So they'll like show up and they'll be like, well, I'd like to learn more about, empathy, or I'd like to learn more about communicating with animals, or like, there's like a sense that there are like places you can go learn.
Mm-hmm.
Earth isn't the only place where you can learn lessons. You can learn up there too. It's just different.
Right.
And what they say is that Earth is one of the most efficient schools or places for spiritual development out there. So it's like if you're trying to make a lot of progress quickly, people tend to come down here because this is the hard knocks, right? Like,
Right.
even if you're not spiritually awake, if you just throw yourself down the mountain, every impact perfects you,
Right.
So, but it, generally speaking, what's the most important? First of all, there's no one telling you what to do at all. There's just sort of a natural sense and magnetism for your consciousness that says, well, I'm ready to do this now, and I'm ready to do this now. And if you're ready to go back, it's not, you might have some helpers or friends that might kind of talk to you about, well, what are you thinking next time? What's the area you want to work on the most in yourself next time? It might try to help you figure out what your goals are going to be. Then you make a little plan, and then you reincarnate down here, and you feel very confident coming in. You're like, I'm going to remember my plan. And then like nobody does. So when you regress someone through the birth process, they come in and they're like, okay, I'm ready. These parents are good. Like, I got this. And then they're like, oh, it's so bright. What am I doing here? Oh my gosh, I can't remember. There was something I was supposed to do. So it's like, as you enter on the other side, it's not like it completely gets wiped clean though, because remember this community thing. Our plan isn't just ours. It involves all these other parts of the network, all these other souls that like we've been through this with a couple times or whatever. So it's like there are little fail safes in there, like little opportunities to wake up that we've all sort of like set up for each other. Right. We also have non-corporeal consciousnesses that are hanging out trying to help. They can't really like intervene per se, but it's that little like whisper in your ear or something like that, or like a gut feeling, that are just there to kind of help offer you some guidance and to help you sort of stay on the track you've set for yourself. But no one's doing it to you. You don't have to incarnate. It's like you just have a sense of magnetism towards the area that you want to develop. Could be here, could be somewhere else. It doesn't matter. You follow it like a calling, it's like whatever you feel called to do. So when people feel like being a human is a punishment or something, it's like, man, you might just be off track.
You could be a stone.
Yeah, right.
When you had your first experience, you said with the Civil War, it was a soldier. Do you still remember like that life, or is it just kind of like a whisper now?
It's very vague. So but you also have to remember, I experienced like the whole life.
Yeah. Like it's the
I don't remember my whole life.
Exactly.
So it's like I remember some of the like greatest, well, my long-term memory is like famously bad. What I like to tell people is like I remember the lessons. I don't remember like the events. Things I've always kind of been that way. I have always been very like living in the moment anyway.
Right.
Probably how I'm doing like, this stuff anyway. But
maybe something from that Civil War person. Do you have something that maybe you would want to impart on us from that life?
No, it was just a hard life. I was a man. And as I was growing up as a child, I always felt very masculine and felt that a woman's body was very foreign to me. And when I had that experience, it's like I was a man. I wasn't like a child, but I was like a young man at that time. So I was at war when I was like 16, 17. And I did survive and got married and had a family. But the overall sense was that like life was hard. Life was really hard. And like being a man didn't mean that I didn't have like this full emotional palette. Like the desire for love and comfort and like all of these things was very suppressed in that individual.
Right.
There's a lot of just like keep going, like grit was the only thing. And those are qualities that I see in my past, in my current life. And those are things that I have worked hard to release. Grit is important. You need to have like persistence, and you need resilience, though. I would actually say resilience is a better word than grit, because grit, think about gritting your teeth. Like grit wears you down. Resilience means you're renewed. You know, it's like a starfish can grow its arm back. I think about myself more like that now, rather than like pushing through no matter what. Also, it helped me place a lot of the more masculine tendencies or energy or assumptions about relating with others that I had as my younger self. And as I was able to understand that in my current incarnation, so not worrying about that guy or whatever, it's just in my current life, I worked on that stuff and learning that the value of empathy, because I think naturally we're all actually quite empathic, but we have to align our values with our behavior for it to kind of develop. And so understanding that it had value, and then working towards being a more open person, a more integrous person, a more compassionate person. And so in a way, it's like, I guess it sort of subtly explained some things in a way, but it just directed me towards my own work now.
Yeah.
So I
So it was
never
kind of
got
like
obsessed with
it brought
it.
you to your path.
Well, in a way, but not by itself. So like
Right.
that was just one thing, but I've had a couple other spooky things happen. You know, just that pointed me towards life being, you know, and they sound really mundane when I share them. So it's like there's one story where I was living in my mom's house because I was about to move to Europe. So I had like moved out of my apartment and was staying there for a couple weeks before my flight. And she had an old pitch pipe from the 70s, which is kind of like a harmonica, essentially. And it was sitting under a chair covered by a pile of clothes. And it was the middle of the night, and I just heard it play. And I couldn't figure out what that sound was, just a single tone, you know, because it's a pitch pipe.
Yeah.
And I couldn't figure out what it was. And I got up and I was looking through the room, and it was very strange. And I was like following my ear. And finally I found it on the floor and pulled this pile of clothes off. And there it is sitting there on the floor. And then it went quiet.
Oh,
weird. And, you know, here I am, this very rough and tumble early 20s, you know, hardened young lady, and was just like, what?
Right.
I'm going back to bed, you know. And then in the same house, and this wasn't an old house, it was a new build. So it's not like, you know, should probably been a house there before, but still. Sure. In the same house, my friend and I threw a huge party, you know, to say goodbye or whatever. And after the party, she and I were cleaning up the next morning and like mopping and cleaning you know, it was college party, so everything was super gross. And there was an old clock hanging up above a doorway that hadn't been wound in like 30 years or something. It was just an antique. It was just there for decoration. And it started ticking. And it was like 8 feet up. So it's like you couldn't even, we didn't have a key to wind this clock. It was just a decoration. And it just started ticking. And she and I just sat there staring at it for a while until she got spooked and left the room. And eventually I said something, you know, I'm just like, ugh, stop that. Or, you know, it's like I said some offhanded comment and it stopped ticking.
Wow.
And what's interesting is like, I wasn't that spooked. Both of these events were weird, but it didn't, you know what I mean? Like it didn't actually spook me. And I feel like there's information sitting there somewhere, because in a sense, it's like life is very strange. And there's like a level of comfort I've always had with that. And now with the practice I do now, there's weird stuff going on all the time. But now I'm just sort of like, yeah, stuff's weird. You know, it's hard to freak me out. But I guess those are the types of events that eventually led me this way. I've always been interested. I was like in 4th grade checking out books from the library about ESP.
Yeah, me too.
You know, so another reason why people come to transpersonal hypnosis, it's very popular among folks that have had experiences with UFOs or something like that they can't explain. By shifting into a different state of consciousness, they can kind of circumvent the emotions they were feeling at the time, so they can see it more objectively and have like a broader understanding of what was happening to them. And usually what we hear when someone has had an experience like that, and then they find out what it was about, it's actually spirit side consciousness trying to wake them up. So it's like the reason it happens. It's not like, ooh, we're here to get you, or you have a special job. It's not even, it's usually not anything like that. Usually it's like, well, it was time. Like you were ready and your soul wanted to wake up, but you weren't awake. So, you know, this was just one doorway. Some people walk through it, some people don't, you know. Just like me passing out while getting a tattoo, I wake up and I'm like, well, that was embarrassing, you know, instead of being like, wow, I just lived this crazy life. Like, you know, there was none of that. It's just,
I mean, it's also a little hard in our society, right? Like if you woke up and you're like, I just lived a whole other life, people would be like, maybe I want to go to the hospital
or something. Yeah.
it's
So that's true
difficult, I
too.
think.
That's true too.
It's difficult to live the truth like that. If you know, you're like, oh, like, am I just, you know, because our society is not built around that.
That's true. But I am happy to say that I think the conversation is becoming more open now.
Yeah.
So I
always
think
say that. Like, we just need to be open to things, even if you're like, you know what, I don't believe that. I
right.
think it's important to listen. I've said this, I had this whole thing on another show that I do, but I said, if we listen and empathize and like really do it, we would
Mhm.
be in such a better place. You
It's
know,
true.
that's
It's
all we
true.
need. And it's, to me, I know for some people it's a really hard switch to turn. You know, they don't want to because they're closed. They're like, I know what I know, and that's it. But yeah, if we could just,
Well, our experience is so subjective. And I have to be honest, if there's one thing I've learned from being a scientist, there's a concept in our culture that science like knows what's happening or something like that. And that's not true. Published science is just like the best we have right now.
Mhm.
And that changes every time a new paper comes out, which is like a lot. So all you're ever seeing is the best new idea, and the best new idea that does the best job at explaining what we see in the world and in the universe. So really getting deep in the woods of science teaches you humility, because you could be wrong. And actually it takes an immense amount of courage to be able to look at new results and say, well, I was wrong. I was missing this piece. This person figured it out. I was going down the wrong track. And so it's made me more open-minded. I tell people that I was stranger after my physics degree than before it, because it just showed me like even the best we have leaves so many immense mysteries left almost untouched, or untouched in a way that there's no way to test it by experiment. So we're just in the realm of ideas now, you know. So I think what you said, Amanda, is perfect, which is staying open and being ready to listen to ideas, but also to have discernment. It's okay to not believe what you hear. It's not that you should believe what anybody tells you. It's more that you should be aware that your own beliefs should not be concrete.
Right,
To
exactly.
stay flexible in yourself, so that in light of new evidence, you can pivot. If you're inflexible, that's something to address, because we should be open to new ideas and we should be able to hear other people. And then we use our discernment and say, does this make sense? Does this not make sense? Do I need to learn more? And approach it in this way. So it's like instead of always sort of sending it through this judgment filter of like, well, I know what I know. It's like, well, only to a point, just like science. It's like, this is the best I have right now. This is the framework of understanding I have right now. It could change at any time faced with different evidence, but it's more like staying curious, staying compassionate, understanding that experience is subjective. So just if someone had an experience that wasn't physically real, that doesn't mean it didn't impact them. I've had very profound mystical experiences that had no physical components of any time, but they were deeply impactful to my behavior, to my life, and to the way I relate to other people. So like, you have to, I mean, maybe we should just shift our values. It's like the reality of something, the physical reality of something matters if it's physical stuff.
Mm-hmm.
If we're dealing with other things, emotions and spirituality and stuff like that, we need to remain open to the fact that other kinds of experience have value, not just physical experiences, right?
And the more that we talk about it and we put it out into the world, hopefully we'll start to shift people's
Yes.
mindsets and make it more acceptable, and of course a more normalized thing.
And that's why conversations like this are so important, and put them out there. And like I said, just be open to anything, right?
Yeah.
Well, and thank you for being here and helping us do that today. This is like, we could talk for like
Oh my gosh,
a
I
week
want to talk
nonstop
for,
about all
yeah,
this
I want
stuff,
to like
but
talk forever right now.
we want to respect your time, and we thank you so much for joining us. And I hope maybe we can have you back if you're up for it.
I would love that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd be so much happier to like spitball with you all too, because I'm very curious. Well, it's like I want to interview you all.
Yes.
but
Do it.
but
We'll
no, this
set it
was
up.
very fun. Yeah, I appreciate y'all having me.
Yeah.
We appreciate your time, and ladies and gentlemen, give it up for Rosa Hope.
Thank you.
Do you have any socials you want to plug or anything like that?
Oh my gosh, I should. Yes. So I'm on Instagram. That's where I'm the most active. So my tag is It's Rosa Hope. Just one word. And if you want to find me on Facebook, it's facebook.com/It's Rosa Hope. I also have websites for my transpersonal hypnosis practice, which is local in Raleigh, North Carolina, but also for my spiritual integration groups. So you can go to rosa-hope.com for access to all of those things.
Awesome. We will do that. And watch out for all my friend requests on each one of those platforms.
Yes.
Thank you again, Rosa.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Paul. Thanks, Amanda.
All right.
Fascinating.
Right? Wasn't that great for our first interview? What?
Yeah. Not our first guest.
No.
Hunter was our first guest, and he helped us with dark matter and dark energy.
Yeah.
On the podcast, the last podcast episode to be released of Magical Mystery Hour.
Oh yeah, I forgot that hasn't come out yet.
It did come out.
It gets confusing to me, like what podcast versus.
That's the most recent podcast episode.
Yeah. Yeah.
Discussion about dark matter and dark energy with Hunter Ackerman. But this was a fascinating conversation. But yeah, this is our first full episode that is a interview. First interview episode.
Yeah. I like Hunter's. She's very articulate. That's actually a good compliment from Hunter.
Much more articulate than me.
I know.
Sure. I'm always like, what I want to say is when you're
I definitely deleted a string of those in that interview from myself because I was trying to figure out how I wanted to say it. I was like, and how it's like cut.
Oh yeah. I mean, in live interviews, that's the thing. Like, let's be honest, in most like television live interviews, it's 95% scripted.
Yes.
It's been rehearsed. You know what questions are going to be asked. You know how you're going to answer it. But in podcasts, it's like, I know what I want to ask you, but I don't have the script for it, and I'm trying to figure it out right now.
Yeah,
so
you have to go where it leads you. You can't. You can do a few things, but for the most part, it's just what happens.
I mean, my point is just like you're thinking out loud most of the time. It's like, so what you said about made me think. And but anyway, I mentioned at the beginning of all of this, when song topics came up for this theme, I immediately my brain went to this song, and you were like, I don't think I know that song.
Yeah, I was like, I don't know this song.
And have you learned it? Are you ready to do it? Or
yeah, so this is all of these weeks, like this whole summer so far has been so much busier than I anticipated. So I was trying to record it, and then so I was supposed to do this podcast, the podcast that I did today before this one. I was supposed to do it last week. The one that I was guest on. I was supposed to do it last week, and I got bumped. Okay. And so, but I said, well, what is the time? Right? Like what time? And he said, well, between 7 and 8 our time. And I said, okay, well, I still have an hour to get this video together because I had done it earlier. And I got one that was super close, except I said one wrong word. And I was like, well, I'm going to try to re-record it. And then I got off the podcast and I was like, hey, Paul, I'm going to try to re-record this. Paul's like, you have like 10 minutes.
And we still started 20 minutes
I know.
later. So.
That was my fault. Sorry. I was like, guys, I got to go. Like, I have my own podcast coming up. All of that is to say that I am going to do this as one of my hybrid lives.
Ooh.
So I'm going to put
using my video, you're going to sing along live to the video that I sent you.
Yeah.
Pre-record.
Yeah. So let me
Exciting.
actually, I'm going to, did I download it or was I playing it through the Dropbox? Hang on. Let me see if sorry. There's all my downloads. Oh, I did. Okay. Let's see. So I'm going to, hold on, and I'll have to stop it before you're like, all right, I'm done recording. I think we hear the little voice that was like,
recording, stop.
Yeah. I'll try my best to stop it for that.
I'm not going to be embarrassed about that. You
No.
don't need to.
All right, let me position this so he takes over your spot. Stop it. I hate when it does that. I'm like, I'm not trying to position this some other way. Just let me put it where I want.
This is a tune. I don't know. I don't have the Craig Jackman intro. I don't know who it was originally by.
Oh no, it's from Babes in Arms, right?
Is it?
I saw that somewhere, like when I was looking, because I was just trying to see if there was like sheet music or anything, and it came up as Babes in Arms.
And that's a musical?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I'm sorry.
I don't know it very well, but I do know that is a musical.
It would make sense because
it's Richard
back
Rogers.
in the day of Frank Sinatra and Ella Fitzgerald. Who's it by?
Richard Rogers. So
is that like Rogers and
yeah.
Hammerstein?
Yeah, it's the Rogers part.
Half of Rogers and Hammerstein. It's late. It's early.
Yeah. Watch tomorrow. Someone's going to be like,
tomorrow already.
no, it is not. Oh, it's a Rogers and Hart.
Oh.
Yeah. So Richard Rogers and Lawrence Hart. 1937 for the musical Babes in Arms. It was first performed by Ray Heatherton and Mitzi Green in the same year. So, yeah. There you go.
All right.
I think so. I'll put the words. Okay, wait. I'm going to do this in the right order.
Amanda is going to sing live to a track that I sent her.
Yes.
Where I played guitar and sang.
Yeah.
So this is always fun to watch her do this, and no pressure.
No pressure.
On her end,
it's all right.
Of course.
It's what happens. It's live performance, and then if I need to, I'll record it for the podcast along with the one of these things
This is
first.
by Rogers and Hart.
Yes.
From Babes in Arms, and it is the song Where or When.
Mm-hmm. Oh, wait, you can't hear it. No. See, live performance. I have it muted over here, Helen. And then I have to turn up your volume even. Whoop. Let's see.
It seems
hopefully this level is good. Okay.
Like
going back.
This.
Wait. Oh, my mouse is terrible in this room. Okay. Starting it again. Here we go. Hope you all are ready.
It seems we stood and talked like this before. We looked at each other in the same way then, but I can't remember where or when.
The clothes you're wearing are the clothes you wore. The smile you are smiling then. But I can't remember where or when.
Some things that happen for the first time
seem to be happening again.
And so it seems we have met before
And loved before.
and loved before.
But who knows where or when? It seems we stood and talked like this before. We looked at each other in the same way then, but I can't remember where or when.
The clothes you are wearing are the clothes you wore. The smile you are smiling, you were smiling then, but I can't remember where or when.
Some things that happen for the first time
Seem to be happening again.
And so it seems that we have met before
And laughed before.
and loved before. But who knows where or when?
Yes.
All right. Gosh, that song is so beautiful.
It's beautifully haunting,
Yes,
and
I loved it.
can't wait to hear the finished version
Yes.
of it. And we appreciate everybody who's still here with us. We are still
Yes.
in 16 households.
Awesome.
Well after midnight on a Monday.
Yeah, for
Tuesday.
a almost 3 hour show. Not quite. Maybe by the time we finish.
We can just wrap it up right now and say thank you so much to everybody for sticking with us, for staying up late at night, and for supporting the journey. And I lost my sound. Hang on one second.
Oh, no.
I'm going to do that again.
We'll wait.
There it is.
We can hear you.
There we are. I just wanted to say thank you, everybody, for joining us for this episode of the Magical Mystery Hour.
If you enjoyed these stories and this interview, be sure that you're subscribed to the show on whichever platform you are listening to or watching.
Yes, and listening to or watching. And if you could take a moment to leave the show a positive review, comment, however you're watching or listening, it'll help more people who like this kind of show find our Magical Mystery Hour.
We'd like to thank producer Craig Jackman and our social media team of Dari Mills, Christina Beelan, and Heather Dingus for their promotional support.
Thank you to David Benjamin for composing and recording our theme music. And thank you again to this episode's sponsor, Emily Thatcher.
Thank you all so much for joining us. Until the next mystery, good night.
Don't wait till your next life to listen to us again. Maybe it is the next life now.